Cast your mind back to Tenochtitlan in the final decades before the Spanish arrival. It is the year 1487. The great temple of Teocalli has just been rededicated, and the city of Tenochtitlan stretches across its island in Lake Texcoco, connected to the mainland by 3 great causeways of stone. 200,000 people move through its canals and markets in what may have been the largest metropolis in Europe at this hour. You are standing at the edge of Lake Texcoco in the Valley of Mexico, and the year is 1518. Before you, the southern causeway stretches across the water like a spine of grey stone, its surface glistening with the dew that has settled in the hours before dawn. The mist rises from the lake in slow, rolling columns, and through this pale veil you can see, or almost see, the distant silhouette of temples rising from what appears to be the water itself. Tenochtitlan waits ahead, though for now it remains half concealed, a city of the imagination as much as of stone and plaster and human labor. The air moves across your face with the particular coolness that comes from large bodies of water in the early morning, carrying with it the smell of damp stone and lake algae that clings to every block of the causeway's construction. You are not alone in your approach. Fishermen have already begun their passage back toward the city, their canoes loaded with the night's catch, and the hollow sound of wooden poles against canoe hulls echoes across the still water in rhythmic, unhurried intervals. Each vessel leaves a brief wake that the mist seems to swallow almost as quickly as it forms. The causeway beneath your feet was built of stone, as were its 2 companions that reach toward the island city from other points along the shore. These 3 great causeways allow access to Tenochtitlan, and without them, the metropolis would remain sealed upon its island, accessible only by watercraft. The stone surface has been worn smooth by generations of feet and wheels and the dragging of tribute loads, and now in the half-light it reflects what little illumination the sky provides. You step forward, and the city that was founded in 1325, according to Aztec tradition, draws nearer with each pace, though the mist continues to obscure and then reveal the skyline in shifting patterns of concealment and disclosure. The name Tenochtitlan is traditionally interpreted as meaning City of Tenoch, with Tenoch said to be derived from TL, stone, and Noch, TLI, prickly pear cactus fruit, though this etymology is debated among scholars. The common translation city of the stone cactus is difficult to justify with complete confidence, yet it persists in the minds of those who hear the name spoken. You will hear it spoken often in the hours to come, for Tenochtitlan was not merely a settlement, but the heart of an empire that dominated much of the Valley of Mexico from the 15th century. The Aztec Triple Alliance was formed between Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan, and this alliance shaped the political landscape of central Mexico for roughly a century. By the early 16th century, more than 100,000 people lived in Tenochtitlan, making it the largest city in the Americas and among the largest in the world at that time. This fact becomes more difficult to comprehend as you walk the causeway, for the mist still holds much of the metropolis in reserve, offering only glimpses of the great temple pyramid that dominates the central precinct. The first warmth of sun has begun to touch the white plaster of temple walls, and where this light strikes, the mist burns away in thin, rising streams that carry the moisture upward into the cooling air. Around you, the merchants are unloading their cargoes at intervals along the causeway, though the main inspection awaits at the city entrance itself. Bundles of cacao, bales of cotton, cages of tropical birds, and baskets of polished jade all pass in both directions, the commerce of an empire flowing across the stone spine that connects island to mainland. The distant call of waterfowl in the reeds beyond the city's edge provides a constant, gentle counterpoint to the human activity, a reminder that Lake Texcoco remains a living body of water despite the architectural triumph that has been imposed upon it. The guards at the causeway entrance examine bundles and baskets with methodical thoroughness, recording tribute goods on paper that bears the intricate pictographic script of the region. These are not merely customs officials, but representatives of a system in which subject peoples are forced to pay tribute rather than being directly incorporated into the imperial structure. The Aztecs, at their height, control large parts of central Mexico through this mechanism of extraction, and the goods passing before you represent the accumulated wealth of dozens of subject communities rendered into portable form. You watch as a scribe marks the accounting, his brush moving with practiced efficiency across the prepared surface. You pass through the checkpoint and enter the city, leaving behind the reedy shores of the lake for the dense urban core that awaits. The transition is immediate and remarkable, where the causeway offered openness and the vast horizontal expanse of water. The streets of Tenochtitlan present a grid of canals and walkways that extends in precise, planned arrangements. Other cities have only land, but this metropolis has mastered the aqueous element, has built upon it and through it until the distinction between solid ground and navigable water becomes a matter of practical negotiation rather than fixed category. Canals intersect at right angles, their surfaces covered with the morning's mist in thinner layers than the lake itself, and along their edges, the houses of nobles and commoners alike rise in stepped configurations of adobe and plaster. The remains of Tenochtitlan are now almost completely built over by modern Mexico City, a fact that belongs to a future you cannot imagine from your position in 1518. Yet even in this present moment, the city possesses a quality of layered accumulation, of structures built upon structures, of sacred precincts expanded and elaborated across generations. The few remaining ruins in the modern city center have been an UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1987, but this designation too belongs to a temporal order far removed from the dawn you currently inhabit. What you see is the living city, the functioning capital of a functioning empire, its streets already filling with the day's commerce and ceremony. The mist continues its slow retreat, rising from Lake Texcoco in ever thinner columns as the sun climbs above the eastern mountains. The skyline that was once obscured now reveals itself in fuller detail. The great twin temples of the Templo, the palace complexes with their multiple courtyards, the residential districts extending toward the lake's edge in all directions. Tenochtitlan, the city of Tenoch, spreads before you with the confidence of a settlement that has known more than a century and a half of continuous growth and elaboration. The stone and the knock, TLI, the prickly pear cactus fruit, persist in the name even as their precise semantic relationship remains partially opaque to those who speak it daily. You move deeper into the urban fabric, and the sensory qualities of the causeway give way to new registers of experience. The smell of damp stone persists, but mingles now with the smoke of cooking fires, the fragrance of flowers arranged in market displays, the less identifiable but equally present odors of concentrated human habitation. The hollow sound of wooden poles against canoe hulls in the still water continues to reach you from the canal network, though it competes now with the voices of vendors, the footsteps of porters, the occasional blast of conch shell, trumpets from some distant ceremonial precinct. The three great causeways that allow access to the island city have brought you to this point, and you understand now that they are not merely functional infrastructure, but symbolic assertions, physical declarations of the relationship between the island capital and the territories it dominates. The southern causeway, along which you have traveled, connects to the shore of the mainland where subject communities maintain their agricultural and tribute-producing existence. The other two causeways extend toward other compass points, other networks of obligation and extraction, and together they bind the island city to the continental landmass in a tripartite grip that has held for generations. The political architecture of the Aztec Triple Alliance manifests in the physical architecture you now observe. The city, founded in 1325, according to Aztec tradition, has become, in less than 200 years, the center of a world, the node through which goods and people and information must pass. The density of this population presses upon your awareness as you navigate the narrowing streets, the crowded canals, the bridges that arch over waterways in precise mathematical intervals. The first warmth of sun on the white plaster of temple walls has intensified, and the mist that rose from Lake Texcoco in the dawn hours has now largely dissipated, leaving the sky a pale, clear blue that seems to intensify the colors of the city below. The turquoise and gold of priestly regalia, the bright cottons of merchant women, the red and black of painted codices displayed for sale in certain specialized markets. All these emerge with greater vividness as the light strengthens. You find yourself moving toward the central precinct, drawn by the gravitational pull of the Great Pyramid that has dominated the skyline since your first approach along the causeway. The city seems to rise from the water itself, and this impression persists even within the urban core, where canals intersect with walkways, and the fundamental aquatic nature of the island site asserts itself in every quarter. The grid of streets and canals where other cities have only land is not merely a practical adaptation, but an aesthetic choice, a way of organizing space that reflects cosmological understandings and political hierarchies. The four cardinal directions, the vertical axis of temple and tomb, the horizontal plane of marketplace and residential district, all these find their expression in the planned regularity of the urban fabric. You pause at the edge of a canal, and a canoe passes, its cargo of fresh produce bound for some noble household or temple kitchen. The smell of damp stone and lake algae on the causeway has given way to other olfactory experiences, but memory preserves it, and the morning's approach across the water remains present in your awareness as a foundational sensory substrate. The guards at the causeway entrance, who examined bundles and baskets, recording tribute goods on paper, represented only the most visible layer of an administrative apparatus that extends throughout the city and far beyond its island boundaries. At its height, the Aztecs control large parts of central Mexico, and the goods flowing into Tenochtitlan represent the materialization of this control, the transformation of territorial domination into portable wealth. Subject peoples are forced to pay tribute rather than being directly incorporated, and this distinction matters for the texture of empire, for the ways in which power is experienced and resisted and negotiated at the local level. You have traveled far from the causeway's terminus, yet the lake remains present, its margins defining the limits of the island, its waters providing the medium of transportation and sustenance that makes this dense settlement possible. The mist rises from Lake Texcoco in memory now, obscuring and then revealing the city skyline in the receding dawn, and the temples that emerged from that pale veil stand before you in fuller visibility, their plaster surfaces catching the morning light. The name Tenochtitlan persists in your thoughts, its etymology a small mystery of linguistic history. City of Tenoch, derived from TL, and Noc, TLI, stone and prickly pear cactus fruit, yet the common translation city of the stone cactus remains difficult to justify with complete philological confidence. The name circulates, is spoken, is written in the pictographic script that the scribes employ, and its meaning lies in the collective usage of the population rather than in any recoverable original intention. You hear it spoken around you, in the marketplace chatter, in the formal address of officials, in the casual reference of passers-by, who simply call the city by its name without reflection on its deeper significance. The remains of Tenochtitlan, you know without knowing, will one day be almost completely built over by modern Mexico City, and the few remaining ruins in the modern city center will become a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1987. But this knowledge does not belong to your present experience, to the dawn of 1518 and the stone causeway and the mist that rose from the lake. What belongs to this present is the immediacy of sensory encounter, the density of urban life, the overwhelming fact of a metropolis that has no parallel in the experience of most who approach it. You continue through the streets, and the morning advances. The three great causeways built of stone have delivered you to this place, and the southern causeway in particular has served as your pathway into the metropolis. The city connected to the mainland by these engineering works now enfolds you in its fabric, and you move through it with the particular attention of one who has traveled far to arrive here. Tenochtitlan, the largest city in the Americas and among the largest in the world at that time, reveals itself in fragments and glimpses, in the accumulation of small observations and local encounters that gradually compose a larger understanding. The mist that rose from Lake Texcoco has gone. The sky is clear. The day advances. The morning light spreads across Lake Texcoco in pale sheets, and you are standing at the edge of a canal where the water meets the land in a softened boundary of reeds and mud. The city of Tenochtitlan recedes behind you now, its great temples and palace walls giving way to the quieter world of the southern lake. Around you, the water stretches in broad channels between narrow plots of cultivated earth, and the air carries the particular humidity of growing things rooted in moisture. You have traveled far to arrive here, and now the particular attention of one who has journeyed through mist and market and causeway turns toward the gardens that feed the multitude. A farmer wades through the cool canal water at first light, pushing his pole against the muddy bottom. His legs disappear to the knee in water the color of pale clay, and each step releases a small cloud of sediment that drifts slowly before resettling. The sucking sound of mud and water against his bare feet accompanies each movement, a soft percussion of heel lifting and toe pressing, and the brief resistance before release. He wears only a simple loincloth, and his skin glistens with the exertion of moving against the water's slight pressure. His pole finds purchase in the soft lake bed, and he propels himself forward through the channel that separates one garden from the next. The word Chinampa comes from Nahuatl Chinamitl, meaning reed fence, and these are the fields he has known since childhood, these rectangles of earth and organic materials built up from the shallows by generations of hands. The sky above the farmer clears to a pale blue that holds no threat of rain. The sun, still low, sends long shadows across the water from the willows that line certain edges of the plots. The sharp green smell of maize leaves and squash vines in humid air reaches him now, carried on air that moves only slightly, enough to stir the surface of the canal into small ripples that catch the light. Insects have begun their morning activity, and their buzzing over still water between the garden plots provides a constant undertone to the larger silence of the lake. A heron stands motionless on a narrow bank, its patience undisturbed by the farmer's passage. The water itself holds a greenish cast where the light penetrates to the vegetation below, and small fish scatter at the disturbance of the pole. He steps onto his family Chinampa, where maize stands in ordered rows and squash vines spread between. The earth beneath his feet feels different now, firmer than the mud of the canal, though still giving slightly under his weight. For the Chinampas were not actually floating, but were fixed to the lake bed by stakes and roots, and the accumulated weight of years of cultivation. These artificial islands were built from earth and organic materials, layer upon layer from the lake's own offerings, and he feels the particular resilience of this construction as he moves from the water onto the planted ground. The maize has reached the height of his shoulder, the leaves broad and slightly rough where they brush against his arms as he passes between the rows. The squash vines have wandered from their intended paths, as squash vines will, and their large leaves create a secondary pattern of shade upon the earth. This practice of cultivation in shallow lakes has shaped the lives of his people for longer than memory extends. His wife and children already tend the plots, removing weeds and checking the moisture of the soil. She works methodically along the edge where the Chinampa meets the water, her fingers moving through the soil with the unconscious precision of long practice. And she does not look up as he approaches, for she has heard the particular rhythm of his wading and knows it as she knows the sound of her own breathing. The children, 2 boys and a girl, move between the rows with smaller versions of the same attention, their hands quick to identify the unwanted growth and pull it free with a twist that brings the root intact. The youngest boy carries a basket for the collected weeds, and it fills slowly with green matter that will itself become nourishment in time. The canal water provided irrigation and prevented frost damage to crops, and this knowledge lives in the placement of the gardens, in the depth of the water channels that surround them, in the particular angle of the plots to the sun's path. The farmer moves to join his wife at the edge, and together they examine a section where the soil seems less rich than the surrounding area, where the maize grows slightly paler, slightly slower. His fingers dig into the earth and bring it to his nose, and he nods at what this tells him, for the gardens were fertilized with sediment dredged from the canal bottoms, and this plot will need such attention soon. The sediment, dark and dense with organic matter, held the concentrated richness of the lake's life, and its application renewed what the crops had taken. The system could produce up to 7 harvests per year, and this abundance depended upon such careful attention, such constant replenishment. The sun climbs higher, and the quality of light changes across the water, becoming more direct, more searching. You are standing at the edge of a canal where the water meets the land, and the heat of the open sun presses against your shoulders and the back of your neck. The willows planted at the edges of Chinampas helped stabilize the soil, and you can see where their roots have woven into the earth, where their trunks lean slightly over the water as if in contemplation of their own reflection. The leaves hang in long strands that move with any breath of air, and beneath them the light falls in patterns of shade and partial shade that shift and reform. The coolness of willow shade after the open sun of the lake draws the farmer's wife and children at intervals, brief respites from the increasing intensity of midday. A kingfisher darts from one branch to another, its blue flash brief as a memory. A canoe passes in the narrow canal between gardens, carrying night soil for fertilizer from the city. The vessel moves slowly, heavily laden, and the man who poles it nods to the farmer without breaking his rhythm, for they have passed each other in this channel many times before. The canoe is older than the man himself, its wood darkened by years of water and sun, and it carries the particular smell of its cargo, sharp and ammoniac, which mingles with the green sweetness of the gardens in a combination that speaks of cycle and return. Tenochtitlan produces much that must be managed, and this is one of the systems by which its abundance is sustained, by which what is used is transformed into what will grow again. The canoe continues its passage, the pole finding the bottom, lifting, finding again, and the wake spreads behind it in slow ripples that touch the edges of the Chinampas before subsiding. The farmer's wife calls to the children, and they gather at a small shelter of reed and thatch at the center of the plot, where a clay pot sits in the shade. The taste of atoll, warm corn gruel, from a clay cup at mid-morning marks this pause in the labor, and the farmer joins them, accepting the cup his wife offers with a gesture that needs no acknowledgement. The atoll is thick, slightly sweetened with honey, and the warmth of it spreads through him as he drinks, replacing something that the morning's work has taken. The children drink more quickly, impatient to return to their tasks or to slip into the water for a moment's play, and the youngest boy has a line of white atoll above his lip that his sister wipes away with the edge of her garment. The buzz of insects over still water between the garden plots continues, unbroken by this human interlude, and a dragonfly pauses on the corner of the shelter before resuming its hunting flight. The Chinampas allowed intensive cultivation of maize, beans, squash, and other crops, and the variety of this agriculture spreads before you in the neighboring plots, in the different greens of different growths, in the taller beans that climb their supports, and the lower spreading of amaranth. A butterfly, large and pale, moves across the canal and settles on a squash flower, its wings folding and unfolding in slow rhythm. The Aztec state organized labor for Chinampa construction and maintenance, and this organization lives in the regularity of the plots, in their typical rectangular shape of about 30 meters by 2.5 meters, in the channels that separate them with a consistency that speaks of planning rather than accident. The farmer's family works their own inherited plot, but they know that larger projects, the building of new Chinampas, the dredging of channels that have silted too full, the repair of damage from storm or flood, may require the coordinated labor of many hands. The original construction with woven reeds persists in memory, even as the method has evolved to include stakes and trees and the accumulated soil of centuries. By midday, the farmer rests in the shade of a willow at the Chinampa's edge, eating cold tamales. His wife has wrapped them in corn husks, and the masa within has hardened slightly from the morning's making, but the filling of beans and chili still carries its flavor, and he eats slowly, savoring the respite from labor as much as the food itself. The children have been sent to gather more sediment from a particularly rich section of canal bottom, and their voices carry from the water in the particular pitch of young people at work, neither complaining nor singing, but occupying some intermediate state of attention. The sucking sound of mud and water against bare feet in the canal continues from where his children work, and he recognizes in it the rhythm of his own morning passage. The tamales finished, he allows himself a longer pause, and his wife joins him, settling against the willow with a sigh that speaks of her own morning's exertion. They do not speak, these two, for the silence between them is of long standing, comfortable as the shade itself, and the communication that passes is of posture and proximity, of the shared observation of a heron that has returned to its station across the channel. The tree has grown with the garden, has been witness to the cycles of planting and harvest that have marked his own life, and the lives of his parents, and their parents before them. The canoe with night soil has passed beyond sight now, its journey continuing through the network of channels that connects the gardens to the city, and the city to the gardens, in a circulation as regular as the blood in a body. Food production from Chinampas supported the city's large population, and this fact lives in the weight of that canoe, in the constant traffic of vessels large and small that move through these waters, carrying produce inward and carrying outward what is needed for the next season's growth. The farmer has never seen the full extent of this system, has never traveled to all the gardens that feed the city, but he knows from the traders' reports, from the official pronouncements at the market, that the scale exceeds what any single life could encompass. This ancient practice has been extended and intensified until it supports a concentration of people unmatched in the surrounding world. The children return with their burden of dark sediment, and the farmer rouses himself from his rest, for the afternoon holds its own demands. The youngest boy has found a frog in the mud, and he carries it carefully in cupped hands, releasing it at his father's instruction at the edge of the Chinampa, where it will find its own habitat among the squash vines. The frog's leap into concealment marks the end of this diversion, and the work resumes with the application of the gathered sediment to the plot that showed need, the farmer's hands darkening with the rich material as he spreads it, as he works it into the soil around the roots of the pale maize. The afternoon progresses in this labor, and the light changes again, becoming more golden more angled, as the sun begins its descent toward the western shore of the lake. The shadows of the willows lengthen across the water, and the buzz of insects over still water between the garden plots takes on a different quality, more sustained, as if the cooling air has made their flight less urgent. The farmer's wife moves along the rows of beans, checking the supports, tying where the vine has outgrown its structure, and her hands move with the same unconscious precision that marked her morning's weeding. The children have been set to watering from the canal, a task that requires careful judgment, for too much water can drown what too little would parch, and the youngest boy has been entrusted with only a small section, his sister watching to correct his errors. The taste of atol from a clay cup at mid-morning seems distant now, a memory of warmth in the cooling afternoon, and the farmer feels the first suggestions of hunger that will mark the evening's return to their house on the edge of the water. But the work continues, for the light remains sufficient, and there is always more to be done than the day allows, more attention that the gardens require, more vigilance against the threats of weather and pest, and the slow exhaustion of the soil itself. The intensity of this cultivation is visible in the very density of the growth, in the way the plants seem to press against each other for space and light. A wind rises from the south, and the surface of the canal roughens slightly, the reflection of sky and cloud breaking into fragments that reform and break again. The willows respond, their long leaves turning to show their paler undersides, and the sound of their movement adds a new layer to the afternoon's composition. The coolness of willow shade in a moving air replaces the stillness of midday, and the farmer pauses to feel this change, to gauge what it might mean for the evening's conditions. His wife looks up from her work, and their eyes meet in a communication that requires no words, a shared assessment of sky and wind, and the smell of the air that carries information as specific as any spoken report. Tenochtitlan begins to assert its presence in the distance, not visually, for the gardens and channels intervene, but in the sound of drums from the temple precincts, in the faint smoke that rises from the many cooking fires, in the gradual increase of canoe traffic as the day advances toward evening. The farmer will return to this city, to the house where his family lives in a district of other farmers and traders and craftsmen. But his day has been here, in this water and this earth, in the particular world of the Chinampas that exists in relation to the city, but also in some measure apart from it. The fixedness of these plots, their rootedness in the lake bed, corresponds to something in his own nature, in his preference for the gradual cycles of growth over the rapid exchanges of the market. The light continues to change, and you are standing at the edge of a canal where the water meets the land in a softened boundary that the evening makes softer still. You have traveled far to arrive here, and the particular attention of one who has moved through this landscape gradually softens, gradually releases its hold on detail, as the day itself releases its hold on light. The heron that has stood motionless throughout the day finally moves, rising with a slow beat of wings that carries it across the canal and beyond the next plot, where it settles again in a patience that seems to transcend the hours. The farmer watches its passage, and something in the grace of that flight, in the economy of its effort, seems to speak to him of patience and persistence, of the long waiting that is part of any life tied to growth and season. He thinks of the word Chinampa, of its origin in Nahuatl Chinamitl, meaning reed fence, and of the ways in which boundaries are made and maintained, the ways in which the water is held back from the earth, and the earth is held firm against the water's tendency to dissolve and reclaim. The children have begun to flag in their attention, the youngest boy stopping more frequently, looking more often toward the house that waits at the day's end. His sister takes on more of his tasks without comment, for this is the way of families, the gradual transfer of burden according to capacity and need. The farmer notices, and his heart moves in him, but he does not speak, for the work must be completed and the boy must learn his own limits and his own strength, must discover that the day's length exceeds what he would choose, but not what he can endure. The artificiality of these islands, this making of the human hand upon the natural world, requires a corresponding making of the self, a construction of capacity through repeated effort, through the daily choice to continue when rest would be preferred. The evening star appears in the clearing sky, and the farmer's wife begins to gather their tools, to prepare for the return journey that will take them through the channels to the firmer ground where their house stands. The tools are simple, wooden and stone, but they have been shaped by use to fit the particular demands of this agriculture, the particular soil and water and crop that they address. The farmer examines his digging stick, noting where the wood has begun to split, and sets it aside for attention, for the evening's rest will include the maintenance of what the day has used. The final tasks completed, the family moves to the edge of their Chinampa, to the point where the pole waits in the mud, where the canoe that will carry them home is tied to a willow root. The water is cooler now, the day's warmth having passed into the air rather than the liquid, and the shock of it against his legs is brief, soon replaced by the familiar sensation of movement against resistance. He poles them away from the plot, and the Chinampa recedes behind them, its ordered rows of maize and squash becoming one shape among many, one plot in the vast pattern that extends across the southern lake. The channels are busier now with the traffic of return, with other families making their way to their own houses, with the larger canoes of traders moving toward the city with the day's harvest. The farmer navigates by memory, by the particular shape of each junction, by the angle of certain willows that have grown to distinctive forms. Tenochtitlan grows more present with each stroke of the pole, its sounds and smells increasing, its smoke visible now against the darkening sky. But the gardens persist even as the city approaches, the Chinampas continuing in their pattern, their maize and squash and beans standing in the evening light that still touches their upper leaves. The house, when they reach it, is modest, built of adobe and thatch, but it holds the warmth of previous occupation, of the cooking fire that has been maintained through the day by a neighbor who shares this duty in exchange for similar service on other days. The farmer's wife moves to the fire, to the preparation of the evening meal, and the children settle into the routines of return, the putting away of tools, the washing of hands and feet, the gradual transition from the outdoor world to the enclosed space of family and rest. The farmer himself pauses at the door, looking back toward the water, toward the direction from which they have come, and something in him remains there, in the gardens, in the slow growth that continues even in darkness, even in absence. The night settles over the lake, and the sounds change, the buzz of insects over still water between the garden plots giving way to the calls of frogs, to the occasional splash of fish rising, to the distant voices of others who still move upon the water. The farmer eats his evening meal, the lighter taste of morning atoll replaced by the heavier flavors of the day's end, of beans and chili, and the corn that his own labor has produced. He does not speak of his day, and his wife does not ask, for the day is present in his posture, in the slight stiffness of his movements, in the earth that still lingers beneath his fingernails despite his washing. The children sleep first, their exhaustion deeper than their parents', and the farmer and his wife sit in the dimming light of the fire, sharing the silence that has marked their marriage. This use of shallow lakes for cultivation has shaped not only the landscape, but the lives that move across it, the patterns of thought and feeling that correspond to water and earth, and the slow transformation of seed into harvest. The hollow rhythm of the Teponasli drum echoes in the dormitory darkness, and you are lying on a woven mat somewhere in the sleeping hall of the Telpochcalli. Around you, boys of 15 years stir beneath thin cotton blankets, their bare feet already drawing back from the packed earth floor where the cold has gathered through the night. The drum speaks again, a wooden voice beating against the adobe walls, and somewhere beyond the reed screen, a single star still holds its place in the fading dark. You feel the mat beneath your shoulder blades, its reeds flattened by months of sleeping bodies, and the warmth of the boy beside you fades as he pushes himself upright with a whispered breath. The Telpochcalli were schools for commoner youth, focused on military training, and this purpose shaped every hour from the first drum before dawn until the last embers died in the communal hearth. Boys entered around age 15, stepping from the Calpulli, the neighborhood ward that had raised them, into a stricter world of shaved heads and shared purpose. You watch a youth 2 mats away shake the sleep from his eyes, his scalp gleaming with the single lock of hair that marks him as a student of war, the rest of his head shaved close to the skull as custom demanded. The Teponastli drum calls once more, and the dormitory fills with the soft sounds of waking, the rustle of bodies leaving warmth behind, the murmur of bare feet finding the cold ground. You rise with them, and the air of the sleeping hall carries the lingering warmth of many breaths, though the highest windows show the first grey seeping through. The sting of cold air in the lungs during the morning run awaits you beyond these walls, but first there is the quick folding of mats, the shared glance of boys who have learned not to speak until spoken to in these first hours. A senior youth moves among the rows with a water jug, and the splash against clay cups marks the only ceremony of waking. You lift the cup past to your hands, and the water tastes of the lake, of the Chinampas where it was drawn, of the long canals that bring life to the city of Tenochtitlan. The cup empties, and already the boys are moving toward the doorway where the stars have finally surrendered to the coming sun. The streets of the Calpulli receive you in darkness, and you are running now with 30 others, your bare feet finding the familiar grooves of stone laid generations past. The cold air moves across your face, and each breath draws the chill deep into your chest, where it wakes something sharper than the drum could summon. Around you, the houses of commoners stand shuttered and still, their inhabitants granted the mercy of longer sleep, their sons and brothers already claimed by the Telpochcalli. A dog barks once from a rooftop and is silent, and the rhythm of your feet against the stone joins the rhythm of the boys ahead, the boys behind, until the sound becomes indistinguishable from the pulse of the city itself. The training ground opens before you as the eastern sky begins to pale, a flat expanse of packed earth bordered by the walls of other Telpochcalli, other Calpulli where similar drums have beaten similar boys into similar motion. You slow with the group, and the sudden stillness after running leaves your breath visible in the chill morning air, small clouds rising and dissipating above bowed heads. An elder warrior stands at the center of the ground, his body marked with the scars of campaigns you have not yet earned the right to hear named, his stance suggesting a patience that has outlasted hundreds of such dawns. He holds a macuahuitl, the obsidian-edged club that is the weapon of Aztec warfare, and the morning light catches the black glass of its teeth where they emerge from the wooden base. The Telpochcalli were attached to neighborhood wards called Calpulli, and this attachment meant that the boys who trained together had already known each other in the streets of childhood, had already shared the particular dust of their particular quarter. You recognize the faces around you, though the training ground has stripped them of family names, of the easy distinctions of home. The elder warrior speaks, and his voice carries the rough texture of campaigns and winters, of orders given in fields far from Tenochtitlan. He demonstrates the proper grip of the macuahuitl, and his fingers settle into the worn grooves where other hands have pressed before. You watch the way his thumb finds the balance point, the way his wrist remains loose until the moment of striking, and the rough texture of wooden practice weapons against callous palms is what awaits you now, the training version passed from hand to hand along the line of waiting boys. Your fingers close around the practice weapon, and the wood has been smoothed by years of gripping, years of boys becoming warriors in this same grey light. The elder warrior moves among you, correcting a grip here, loosening a shoulder there, and his touch is brief and certain as the touch of a carpenter fitting a joint. You strike at the wooden post as he has demonstrated, and the shock travels through your forearm, into your shoulder, reminding you that the macuahuitl is not a weapon of subtlety, but of weight and repeated impact. The post stands in a line of similar posts, each marked with the cuts of obsidian and the softer wounds of practice wood, and you strike again, finding the rhythm that the elder warrior has not named but expects. The Karmakak were schools for nobles, administered by priests, and this difference shaped a parallel world of learning that you will glimpse only from the edges of your own path. The boys of the Karmakak wake also, in chambers nearer the temples, and their dawn is filled with the recitation of sacred calendars, with the memorization of lineage and ritual. You strike the post again, and somewhere beyond the training ground their voices rise in chant, a sound that carries over the walls and mingles with the grunts of your exertion. The distinction between Telpochcalli and Karmakak is not one you question. It is the water you swim in, the air you breathe, the given shape of the world that the gods and the ancestors have established. Yet the Kokoro were elite warrior orders open to commoners who captured enemies, and this possibility hangs before you like the star that hung in the dormitory window, a distant light that proves the darkness is not absolute. Sweat gathers at your hairline despite the cold, and the sting of cold air in the lungs during the morning run has given way to the deeper burn of exertion sustained. The elder warrior calls a halt, and the practice weapons fall to sides, to the ground, and the boys stand breathing in the half-formed light, their chests heaving in unison like the chest of some single creature. You look at the boy beside you, his face sheened with effort, and he looks back with the blankness that training teaches, the mask that will serve in battle as it serves now in the exhaustion after practice. The eastern sky has brightened to the color of old copper, and the smoke of morning fires begins to rise from the Kalpali beyond the training ground walls. The smell of burning copal incense drifts from a nearby temple, carried on a breeze that moves without urgency across the flat ground. You turn your face toward it, and the sacred scent mingles with the earthier smells of sweat and exertion, the particular dust of the training ground rising from feet that shift and wait for the next command. The elder warrior has stepped aside to speak with a younger instructor, and their voices carry only in fragments, words of bodies and progress and the particular needs of particular boys. You catch your breath, and the copal reaches you again, and the temple from which it rises stands at the edge of your vision, its stepped profile dark against the brightening sky. Girls were educated separately, often in domestic skills and crafts, and this separation is as complete as the wall between Kalpali and Kalpali, as the distance between the dormitory of the Telpochcalli and the houses where sisters and mothers move through their own dawns. You do not think of them now, or if you do, it is as the background of a world that has receded with the first drumbeat, with the first cold step onto stone. The elder warrior returns, and his shadow stretches long across the ground, and you are moving again, this time in formation, the practice weapons raised against imagined enemies, against the histories of battles that have made Tenochtitlan what it is. The discipline was strict, with punishments including beatings and exposure to cold, and this knowledge lives in your body as much as in your memory. You have seen boys stand through the night for some failure of attention, some lapse in the precision that the Telpochcalli demanded, and you have felt the switch across your own shoulders when your grip faltered, when your eyes wandered to the temple smoke or the passing bird. The threat is not spoken now, but it lives in the elder warrior's gaze, in the set of his shoulders as he watches the line move through its paces. You strike and step, and the formation holds, and the cold air moves across your face, and the sun has finally cleared the horizon to cast the first true light upon your work. The training eases as the morning advances, and you are given reed spears, lighter than the wooden practice swords, meant to teach the extension of the body into space, the reach that will one day find flesh. The boys practice with reed spears, their breath visible in the chill morning air that has not yet surrendered to the coming warmth of day. You thrust at the marked post, and the reed bends and recovers, and you learn the follow-through that the elder warrior demonstrates, the full commitment of weight and momentum. Around you, other boys find their own rhythms, and the sound of reed against wood becomes a kind of secondary drum, a percussion of effort that fills the training ground. The Kokoro were elite warrior orders open to commoners who captured enemies, and this possibility returns to you as you work, as the reed spear finds its mark again and again. You have heard the songs of the Kokoro, have seen their distinctive shaved heads and single large ear ornaments in the processions of festival days. They are old men now, some of them, their capturing days behind them, but their rank remains, their place in the order of the city secured by what they did in youth, in the heat of battle, in the moment when an enemy could be taken rather than killed. You thrust again, and the reed bends, and the post stands unmoved, and the sun climbs higher. The Eagle and Jaguar warrior societies were prestigious military orders, and their costumes haunt the edges of your ambition, the eagle helmet with its spreading wings, the jaguar pelt that transforms a man into something that moves with the night. These were honors beyond the Kokoro, requiring not merely capture, but capture in the full sight of the army, the repeated proof of courage that made a commoner into something that nobles must acknowledge. You have seen the eagle warriors at the great ceremonies, have watched them move with the bearing that comes from knowing that the city lives because they have made it live, because their captured enemies have fed the altars that feed the sun. The reed spear bends in your hands, and you are far from such visions, far from the battles that would make them real, but the Telpochcalli exists to close that distance, to shape the body, and will that might one day wear the eagle or the jaguar. The elder warrior calls the formation to rest, and the reed spears fall, and you stand in the full light of morning now, the sun warm on your neck where the cold had been. The training ground shows the marks of your passage, the disturbed dust, the scattered reeds where spears have been dropped too quickly, the footprints of running boys still visible in the softer earth at the edges. You breathe, and the sting of cold air in the lungs during the morning run has faded into something else, a deeper capacity, a sense that your body has expanded to meet the demands placed upon it. The elder warrior moves among you, and his words are fewer now, the teaching of the body largely complete for this day, the teaching of the mind about to begin. Students at the Telpochcalli slept in dormitories and ate communal meals, and the meal that awaits you now draws the group inward, away from the training ground, toward the long hall where the cooking fires have been tended through the morning by those boys too young or too injured to train. You walk with the others, and your bare feet find stone again, then the packed earth of the Calpulli street, then the threshold of the eating hall where the smell of atoll and tortillas replaces the smell of burning copal incense that still drifts from the nearby temple. The rough texture of wooden practice weapons against callous palms has given way to the smoother texture of clay bowls passed hand to hand, and you settle onto a bench with the others, your body aware of its hunger in a way that the dawn drum could not have summoned. The taste of bitter atoll drunk from shared bowls after training fills your mouth, and the warmth spreads downward from your throat, into your chest, into the chilled spaces that the running and the striking did not fully reach. The bowl is plain, undecorated, the ceramic of common use rather than ceremony, and you drink from the same rim that other mouths have found, that other mornings have pressed in this same hall. The atoll is thin today, the maize ration stretched by some calculation of the Calpulli elders, but its bitterness is familiar, and the warmth is real, and you drink until the bowl is empty and passes from your hands to the boy beside you. Tortillas follow, and the chewing is its own rest, the jaw working where the arms have worked, the swallow where the breath has labored. Around you, the boys of the Telpochcalli eat in the relative silence that follows exertion, the silence of bodies being fed after being spent. You look down the long table, and the faces are becoming familiar in a new way, not merely as the boys of your Calpulli, but as the warriors they might become, the men who might stand beside you in battle, who might capture or be captured, who might rise to the Kokoro or fall to the anonymous death that claims most who take the field. The communal meal binds you to them as the communal dormitory does, as the shared cold of the morning run does, and you understand without being told that this binding is part of what the Telpochcalli teaches, that the army moves as one body because it has eaten and slept and suffered as one body. The elder warrior enters the hall, and the eating continues, but something shifts in the quality of attention, a readiness that the boys assume without being instructed. He carries no weapon now, and his scars seem less prominent in the indoor light, but his presence holds the room as the drum held the dormitory. He speaks, and his voice fills the space between the chewing, and the words are not of food or rest, but of what comes after, of the history that must be known by those who would make history. You set down your tortilla, and the atoll in your bowl grows cool, and you listen as the boys around you listen, as generations of boys in this hall have listened. After exercise, they gather to hear the history of Tenochtitlan's founding, spoken in the half-light that persists in the hall despite the morning sun beyond the doorway. The elder warrior's voice takes on the cadence of recitation, of words passed from mouth to mouth since the first telling, and you hear again of the eagle upon the cactus, of the long wandering from Aztlan, of the sign that the god Huitzilopochtli promised to show the people who would become the Mexica. The words move through you, and the half-light seems to deepen as the story continues, as if the hall itself were returning to the dawn from which you have just emerged, the dawn before Tenochtitlan existed, before the Telpochcalli and the Karmakak, before the distinction of commoner and noble had taken its present shape. Songs and oral histories were part of education, preserving Aztec traditions, and the elder warrior's recitation is not merely information, but preservation, the keeping alive of what makes the Mexica distinct from the people they conquered, from the people who conquered them in older cycles of time. You sit in the half-light, and the words enter you as the atoll entered, as the cold air entered, becoming part of what you are becoming. The founding of Tenochtitlan is not a story of a single moment, but of many moments, of years of searching, of false signs and true, of the final lake where the eagle spread its wings and the cactus bore its fruit. The elder warrior speaks of the first Chinampas, of the first raising of land from water, and you remember the farmer and his wife, the children sleeping first, the silence that marked their marriage, and the word Chinampa comes from the Nahuatl Chinamitl, meaning reed fence, and you understand now the depth of that silence, the generations of work that made it possible. The Calpulli receive their sons back as the morning advances, and the training ground empties, and the dormitory fills with boys who will sleep through the heat of the day, who will wake again to the afternoon's lighter training, to the evening meal, to the drum that beats tomorrow before the stars fade. You are among them, and your body sinks into the mat with the heaviness that comes from having been fully used, and the woven reeds yield beneath your weight. You wake to afternoon light, and the dormitory is nearly empty, only the injured and the very young still in their mats, and you rise to join the others in the lighter training of the day, the running of messages, the maintenance of weapons, the endless repetition that makes skill automatic, that makes the body capable of what the mind cannot plan in the moment of crisis. You move through the afternoon, and the sun crosses the sky, and the shadows lengthen in the Calpulli streets where you once played as a child, where you will one day walk as a man, if the training succeeds, if the battles permit, if the gods continue to favor the city that the eagle found. The evening meal comes, and the taste of bitter atoll drunk from shared bowls after training is replaced by the thicker atoll of evening, the tortillas of the second eating, the beans that have simmered through the day. You sit with the boys who have become, in these months, something like brothers, and the talk is of the day's errors and small successes, of the elder warrior's mood, of rumors of campaigns to come. The dark comes, and the stars emerge, and you find your mat in the dormitory where the hollow rhythm of the Teponasli drum echoed in the darkness of morning, where it will echo again before you are ready, before any of you are ready, but ready is not a condition that Telpochcalli waits for. You lie on your back, and the reed mat presses against your shoulder blades, and the boy beside you settles with a sigh that is not quite a word. You breathe it in, and the scent holds something of the day, something of the training ground and the eating hall and the half-light of history, and you drift towards sleep with the voices of the elder warrior's recitation still moving somewhere in your memory. The story of the eagle, the cactus, the lake that became a city, the city that sends its sons to the Telpochcalli to learn what it means to belong to something larger than the Calpulli, larger than the self that lies on the mat waiting for the drum. Youth were taught to wake before dawn for training exercises, and this teaching has entered your body so completely that you wake now before the drum, your eyes opening to darkness, your ears straining for the sound that has not yet come. You lie still, and the stars show through the high window, and the boy beside you breathes in the rhythm of deeper sleep, and you wait. The drum comes, and you rise, and the day repeats itself with variations that you no longer note, the cold stone under bare feet, the visible breath, the Macuahuitl's demonstrated grip, the reed spears, the atoll, the history spoken in light that is always half-formed, always becoming. The training emphasized physical endurance, military skills, and civic duty, and these three strands braid together in your days until you cannot separate the running from the striking from the listening, the body from the weapon from the city that requires both. You are standing at the edge of the lake at dawn, though there is no harbor here, only the water that surrounds Tenochtitlan, only the causeways that connect it to the mainland, and the image comes from some half-remembered story, some other place that the elder warrior's voice once touched upon in its long recitation of Mexico wanderings, a place of reeds and distance that waits beyond the training ground, beyond the city, beyond the wars that will claim you, or make you what the Telpochcalli has prepared you to become. The morning light spreads across the surface of Lake Texcoco in thin sheets of pale gold, and you are standing at the water entrance of the great market of Tlatelolco, though the city was originally a separate city-state on an adjacent island before its incorporation into Tenochtitlan's domain. The lake breathes cool air against your face as canoes glide through the channels between the Chinampas, their hulls heavy with the produce of the floating gardens. A woman from the Chinampas unloads her canoe at the market's water entrance, baskets of maize and tomatoes balanced across her shoulders and in her arms, and the water drips from the woven reeds of the vessel onto the stone of the landing place. Around you, the merchants are unloading their cargoes in the grey half-light that precedes the full day, and the sound of their voices carries across the still water in low murmurs that do not yet compete with one another. The woman from the Chinampas finds her regular place among the vegetable sellers, spreading a woven mat for her goods upon the swept earth of her designated section, and her place is one among hundreds arranged in rows that extend far beyond where your eye can follow. The mat unrolls with a soft crackle of dried fibers, and she arranges her tomatoes in careful pyramids that catch the strengthening light in their red and yellow skins. The smell of cacao, vanilla, and chili mingles with fish and raw cotton from the neighboring sections, and this particular combination settles into the back of your throat as you move through the waking market. The visual patchwork of colored textiles, piled produce, and bright plumage has not yet fully assembled itself, for many traders are still arranging their displays, but already the promise of it gleams in folded cloths and stacked baskets. A Pochteca merchant examines her produce, calculating value against a string of cacao beans that he draws from a pouch at his waist, and the cacao beans served as a form of currency and standard of value throughout the markets of the empire. His fingers move along the string with practiced efficiency, and his eyes assess the firmness of her tomatoes with the knowledge of one who has traveled far to trade in this place. The sun clears the eastern mountains and pours its warmth across the open market space, and the heat of midday will press down upon this place in hours yet to come. But for now, the light is gentle, and the air retains the coolness of the lake. You taste a sample square of amaranth candy offered by a neighboring seller, and the sweetness dissolves across your tongue with the faint memory of honey and the toasted depth of the grain. The woman from the Chinampas accepts the Pochteca's string of cacao beans and tucks it into the folds of her huiple, and around her the market continues its slow inhalation of breath, drawing in more canoes, more burden-bearers, more bundles of goods from every direction. The sound of bargaining rises through the morning. Thousands of voices, languages from across the empire, and the overwhelming density of voices in multiple languages and dialects creates a texture unlike any other sound you have known. Nahuatl dominates, but beneath it and through it thread the cadences of Totonac, Mixtec, Zapotec, and tongues from the distant southeast, whose names you do not recognize, each vendor calling the quality of their wares, each buyer protesting the price, each transaction weaving another thread into the vast fabric of exchange. Professional market officials called Tlatelolco supervise transactions in this place, and you observe one now as he moves between the rows of sellers, his mantle marked with the insignia of his office, his presence ensuring that the standard measures are honored and the agreed values maintained. The market was organized by product type, with designated areas for different goods, and this principle reveals itself to you as you walk through the expanding morning. The vegetable section, where the woman from the Chinampas arranged her mat, gives way to rows of pottery, the vessels nested within one another in towers of terracotta and painted ceramic, and beyond that the feather workers display their iridescent wares, the green and blue of Quetzal, the rose and gold of Parrot, the sharp yellow of Aureole arranged in fans and shields, and the elaborate headdresses of ceremony. Cotton cloth called Quachli also functioned as a money substitute, and you see it now in folded lengths, in measured strips, in the careful wrapping of bundles that pass from hand to hand. The goods traded included food, pottery, textiles, feathers, jade, and slaves, and each category occupies its territory with the logic of long tradition, the slave market standing apart at the northern edge where the Pochteca conduct their most solemn transactions. The market served as an information hub for news from across the empire, and as you pause beside a seller of obsidian blades, you catch fragments of conversation that travel far beyond the exchange of goods. A lord has died in Tlacopan. The rains have failed in the eastern valleys. A new embassy has arrived from the distant Tarascan frontier with offers of alliance or threat of war, the interpretation still uncertain. The market operated on a barter system with standardized luxury goods as equivalents, and this system of value allows the news itself to circulate as another form of currency, traded in whispers and the leaning close of one merchant to another. The heat of midday presses down on the open market space, and the light becomes sharp and white, bleaching the colors of the morning into something harder and more defined. You seek the shade of a stretched awning, where a seller of atoll offers a cup of the thick maize drink cooled with lake water, and the taste of it fills your mouth with the fundamental substance of this place, the grain that sustains the city and the empire beyond. The woman from the Chinampas has traded some of her morning's cacao for a length of new thread for her loom, and she examines its color and weight with the satisfaction of one who knows precisely what she requires for the weaving that waits at home. A Pochteca merchant examines the produce of another Chinampa, and the repetition of this scene across the vast expanse of the market suggests a rhythm older than any individual transaction, older than the incorporation of Tlatelolco into Tenochtitlan's domain, older perhaps than the island cities themselves. The Pochteca merchants played a central role in long-distance trade, and their presence here, their strings of cacao and their quiet assessments, connect this morning market to the farthest reaches of the known world, to the tropical lowlands where vanilla orchids climb through forest canopy, to the cold highlands where obsidian waits in its volcanic beds. Local producers brought agricultural goods from the Chinampas and surrounding areas, and their canoes now depart lightened of their morning loads, some returning empty, others filled with the acquisitions of a successful day. The woman from the Chinampas has traded her vegetables for salt, pottery, and new thread for her loom, and her mat rolls up with the same soft crackle with which it spread. Its brief occupation of the earth ended until the next market day. Market days followed a 5-day cycle in the Aztec calendar, and this rhythm governs the lives of those who depend upon exchange, the count of days moving toward the next, gathering with the inevitability of celestial motion. Artisans sold their crafts directly in designated sections, and you pass through the quarter of the gold workers, where the soft metal gleams in the shade, through the quarter of the lapidaries, where jade receives its final polish against wood and sand, through the quarter of the scribes, where the black and red of painted books await the buyers of knowledge and prestige. The overwhelming density of voices in multiple languages and dialects gradually diminishes as the afternoon lengthens, the thousands of morning voices reduced to hundreds, to dozens, to the few who remain to complete their business in the slanting light. The taste of the amaranth candy lingers still in your memory, though the seller herself has packed her remaining stock and disappeared among the departing crowd. Spanish soldiers later stated they had never seen a market equal to Tlatelolco, and this testimony from a future that none here can imagine seems to hover at the edge of the scene, a recognition not yet earned, but already inherent in the scale and order of what surrounds you. The magnitude of this place reveals itself most fully now in the emptiness that succeeds the fullness, the vast, swept ground extending in all directions, the few remaining figures small against the architecture of commerce that the morning will fill again. The heat of midday has passed, and the light softens toward evening, the long shadows of the western mountains reaching across the lake to touch the water entrance where the woman from the Chinampas first unloaded her canoe. You stand at this same landing place, and the cool air moves across your face with the promise of night, the lake breathing out the stored warmth of the day in slow exhalations that carry the smell of water and mud and the distant vegetation of the Chinampas. Even now, in its near emptiness, fragments of the day's intelligence continue to circulate, the last traders exchanging final words before the darkness interrupts their commerce. The smell of cacao, vanilla, and chili still clings to the woven reeds of the landing place, though the fish and raw cotton have dispersed with their sellers. The organization of the market persists in the absence of the goods themselves, the patterns of foot-worn earth marking where the vegetable sellers gathered, where the potters displayed their vessels, where the feather workers spread their iridescent wares. Something of Tlatelolco's original independence persists in the particular character of this market, its difference from the commercial spaces of Tenochtitlan proper, its own tradition of exchange and measurement, and the gathering of distant peoples. The woman from the Chinampas has long since departed, her canoe now gliding through the evening channels toward the floating gardens where her loom waits with its interrupted weaving. The thread she acquired in trade will be worked into the fabric of her household's clothing. The salt will preserve the fish of tomorrow's catch. The pottery will replace the vessel that cracked in last week's cooking fire. Her day of transactions has followed the ancient logic of this place. The value of her tomatoes translated into cacao. The cacao translated into the specific objects of her need. The Pochteca merchants have withdrawn to their quarters, their strings of cacao beans hidden in secure storage, their accounts of the days trading ready for the memory of their trained record keepers. Their presence in the great market represents only one moment in longer journeys that extend from the Gulf Coast to the Pacific, from the southern tropics to the northern deserts. Their calculations continue in the darkness of their lodgings, the value of maize against cotton, of feathers against jade, of slaves against the rarest commodities that only they can obtain from beyond the boundaries of the empire. The taste of the amaranth candy has faded from your tongue, leaving only the ghost of sweetness that precedes hunger. The heat of midday has dissipated into the larger heat of the earth, the accumulated warmth of stone and soil that will sustain the night against the cooling air from the lake. You walk through the market's abandoned sections, and your footsteps echo with a hollowness that the morning's thousands of footsteps would not permit. Even now, in the absence of transactions to supervise, one or two Tlatelolco remain visible at the edges of the space, their vigilance extending through the hours of darkness to prevent the theft of what has been left for tomorrow's commerce. The vastness of the market asserts itself most powerfully in this emptied state, the rows of absent sellers extending farther than you had perceived when they were filled with their wares. The absence of goods creates a negative presence, the space defined by what it temporarily contained. You find a fragment of quatchly cloth caught upon a rough edge of the landing stone, a small scrap that escaped its intended purpose, now fluttering in the evening breeze. The mingled smells of cacao, vanilla, chili, fish, and raw cotton persist in your memory, the blending more complete than it ever was in the actual moment of perception, the senses combining in recollection as they cannot in immediate experience. The image of the woman from the Chinampas returns to you with the persistence of something witnessed rather than something completed, the action ongoing in the mind, though finished in the world. She finds her regular place among the vegetable sellers, spreading a woven mat for her goods, and the spread of the mat continues also, the gesture extended through time by the power of your attention. The historical fact of Tlatelolco's incorporation manifests in the architecture that surrounds the market, the temples visible beyond the commercial space, dedicated to gods that the separate city-state once honored in its own right. The evening quiet carries its own information, the silence of the market speaking of the day's completion, the rest that precedes the next cycle of gathering and dispersal. The count of market days continues toward the next opening, the numbers moving through their sequence with the indifference of mathematical necessity. The lake darkens as the last light withdraws, and the water entrance becomes a place of subtle sounds, the lapping of small waves against stone, the distant call of water birds settling for the night, the occasional splash of some creature hunting at the surface. You are standing at the water entrance of the great market, and the standing extends. The position becomes a duration rather than a point, your presence in this place stretching across the hours of darkness that now descend. The cool air moves across your face with increasing insistence, and the stars emerge in patterns that the market's dust and smoke would have hidden during the hours of commerce. The taste of the amaranth candy returns unexpectedly, triggered by some association you cannot trace, the sweetness as vivid now as it was in the morning's sampling. The heat of midday has become the cool of evening pressing in from the lake, the pressure of temperature reversed, but the sensation of weight upon the body remaining constant. The mingled smells persist in the faintest residual traces, the odors absorbed into the stone and earth of the market ground, released slowly as the temperature drops, a slow exhalation of the day's commerce. The completed exchange of the woman from the Chinampas now exists as a fact in the world, irreversible, contributing its small weight to the vast accumulation of transactions that constitutes the market's history. The Pochteca merchant examines her produce in your memory, calculating value against a string of cacao beans, and the calculation continues, the ratio of tomatoes to cacao unresolved, open to the infinite refinement of mercantile assessment. The standard of value persists even in the darkness, even in the absence of the beans themselves, the concept of value maintaining its hold upon the imagination. The possibility of exchange extends through the night to the next market day and beyond, the equivalence of goods persisting as a spatial memory, the body retaining the knowledge of where the vegetable sellers gathered, where the potters displayed their vessels, where the feather workers spread their iridescent wares. The directness of the relationship between artisan and buyer, the absence of intermediary between maker and purchaser, constitutes a form of honesty that the darkness does not diminish. The local quality of production, the short distance between the growing and the selling, represents a value that the Pochteca's long-distance trade cannot replicate. Yet the inclusion of slaves in the list of goods marks the limit of what the market's organization can render benign, the human commodity persisting as shadow within the system of value. The testimony of Spanish soldiers from a future that will destroy what it admires hangs in the night air with the weight of prophecy unfulfilled. The size of this market will not protect it, its order will not preserve it, its function as information hub will not provide the intelligence that might avert what approaches. The weight of this historical awareness presses upon the calm narration without amplifying it, the pressure of knowledge sustained in quiet, declarative tones. You are standing at the water entrance, and the standing continues, the position in space becoming a position in time, your presence extending through the hours of darkness toward a morning that will resemble this morning in its particulars, while differing from it absolutely. The mingled smells persist in the faintest possible concentration, the last molecules of the day's commerce dispersing into the larger atmosphere of the lake. The woman from the Chinampas spreads her woven mat in the darkness of your closed eyes, and the spread of the mat becomes the spreading of sleep, the crackle of dried fibers becoming the sound of consciousness loosening its hold upon the external world. The visual patchwork fragments into the colors of dream, the specific images dissolving into the general sensation of abundance, of variety, of the eye overwhelmed by the generosity of the visible. The taste of the amaranth candy becomes the taste of sleep itself, sweet and grainy and slowly dissolving. This final information, this news of the market's own nature and function, circulates through the darkness as the last transaction of the day, the exchange of attention for story, of wakefulness for the permission to rest. The cycle continues, the count moving toward the next gathering, the next dispersal, the next opportunity for the woman from the Chinampas to unload her canoe at the market's water entrance. Baskets of maize and tomatoes balanced across her shoulders and in her arms, the water dripping from the woven reeds of the vessel onto the stone of the landing place, the morning light spreading across the surface of Lake Texcoco in thin sheets of pale gold. His house opens directly onto one of the grid of canals serving as streets, a design that shapes every movement of city life. The canoe is a small personal craft, carved from a single log and scraped to a smooth hollow, and it rocks gently as he places his paddle inside. Around you, other water entrances are awakening, their wooden doors sliding open to reveal dark interiors and the silhouettes of people beginning their morning routines. The man pushes off from his house's water entrance, his canoe gliding into the morning traffic, and you follow the movement of his vessel as it enters the stream of boats already filling the canal, The gentle splash and drip of the paddle in still canal water marks his progress, each stroke measured and unhurried. The Aztecs had no knowledge of the wheel for transport purposes, and so this watery avenue serves the function that a broad road might serve in another city, though the motion here is softer, more fluid, less burdened by the jolt and creak of cartwheels. Canoes were the primary means of transportation within the city, and their numbers swell with each passing moment as the morning advances. You move along the canal's edge, passing houses whose lower walls are darkened by the constant presence of water, whose doorways give onto small landings where children sit with their feet dangling above the surface. The smell of water and algae mixed with cooking smoke from house doorways drifts across the narrow channel, a scent that belongs to this hour and this place alone. The man navigates between larger cargo canoes and small craft carrying women to market, his small vessel weaving through gaps that open and close with the rhythm of traffic. The largest canoes could carry up to 20 people or substantial freight, and you see one such vessel now, its hull low in the water with a load of building stone, 6 men poling in unison along the deeper central channel. The canal widens slightly at a junction where 3 waterways meet, and here the traffic thickens, the movement of vessels becoming more deliberate, more negotiated. Poles were used in shallow water, paddles in deeper channels, and you observe the transition as the cargo canoe passes from the shallows into the main artery, its crew switching from their long poles to broad-bladed paddles with a practiced coordination. Canoe traffic was regulated, with designated lanes for different directions, and the flow obeys an invisible architecture, vessels keeping to their appointed sides without apparent instruction, the pattern maintained by custom and repetition rather than visible signal. The morning advances, and the pale gold of early light deepens toward the amber of full day. You continue along the canal, passing beneath a bridge of removable wooden sections that spans the waterway at a height, allowing most traffic to pass beneath its planks. The wood is weathered to a silver gray, and the joints where the sections meet are dark with water stain. Around you, merchants unload their cargoes at various landings, their voices low and continuous, the soft thump of canoes bumping at the water stairs punctuating the murmur of transaction. The creak of wood accompanies every movement, the sound of hull against stone, of paddle against gunwale, of the bridge itself settling on its supports. At the bridge, the man waits as a section is removed to let a tall load of firewood pass, and you pause with him, observing the procedure. 2 men on the bridge have lifted the wooden section from its pegs, sliding it aside to create an opening through which the tall canoe, its firewood stacked 3 times the height of a man, can proceed. The process is unhurried, governed by the same patience that seems to infuse all movement in this city. The bridge section is leaned against the remaining structure, and the tall canoe passes through, its polers calling a low greeting to the bridge keepers. The man in his small craft follows, ducking his head though the opening is ample, a gesture of habit rather than necessity. The canal continues, and you move with the current of traffic, the morning now well advanced, the sun climbing above the line of houses to illuminate the water directly. The cool shade of the narrow canals, after the open brightness of the lake, lies ahead, in the older district toward which the man is steering. You pass a landing where officials in cotton cloaks are recording the arrival of tribute goods, their brushes moving across the surface of amatl paper. Canoes brought tribute goods directly to the palace and temple complexes, and you see the direction of some vessels changing as they near these centers of power, peeling away from the main flow to seek the specific landings appointed for their cargo. The water itself is a living element, not merely a road, but a presence that requires constant attention. The canals required regular dredging to prevent silting, and you notice the marks of this labor on the banks, the heaps of black mud drying in occasional clearings, the channels maintained at a depth that allows the passage of even the largest vessels. The work is ongoing, invisible on this particular morning, but present in the evidence of its recent completion. The water flowing more freely where the bottom has been cleared, the current slightly quicker, slightly more eager in its movement. The man paddles on, and you follow his progress through the widening and narrowing of the waterways, the architecture of the city revealing itself in the pattern of its water streets. Fresh water was brought to the city through an aqueduct from Chapultepec, and though that structure lies in another direction, its presence is felt in the quality of the water here, less brackish than it might otherwise be, more suited to the needs of a growing population. The aqueduct was built during the reign of Moctezuma I in the mid-15th century, a span of years that now seems distant, but that established the infrastructure still serving the city. A second aqueduct was later built by Nezahualcoyotl of Texcoco, and the two systems together sustain the life that moves around you, the water that fills these canals and slakes the thirst of the houses that line them. You turn with the man into a quieter canal, the sound of his paddle echoing off the walls of houses that press closer here, their upper stories overhanging the water to create a corridor of shadow and reflected light. The noise of the main traffic fades behind, replaced by the more intimate sounds of this residential waterway, the splash of laundry being washed at a landing, the low call of a woman to her child, the clatter of a utensil against stone. The houses here are older, their plaster worn to reveal the stone beneath in patches, their water entrances smaller, more private. You pass a man repairing a net, his canoe tied to a post while he works, his fingers moving with the automatic dexterity of long practice. He does not look up as you pass, absorbed in the mesh of fibers that will catch the fish of Lake Texcoco, that will feed the household whose doorway is 3 steps above his head. The canal narrows further, becoming a passage between garden walls, the sound of vegetation close on either side, the drip of water from overhanging plants adding to the moisture of the air. The man slows his paddling, the rhythm becoming more measured, more contemplative, as if this portion of his journey requires a different attention, a different quality of movement. You sense that he is nearing his destination, that the quiet of this channel serves some purpose of approach, of preparation for the business that awaits him at its end. The afternoon finds you in a different quarter, the sun now high and the shadows short, the traffic in the canals having shifted in character with the passing hours. The morning rush of market-bound vessels has given way to a more dispersed movement, canoes carrying single passengers on errands, larger craft moving with the unhurried pace of goods that need not arrive at any particular hour. Night travel on the canals was limited, but not unknown, and you sense in the current activity a preparation for the hours of darkness, the last necessary movements before the water streets grow still. Even in this quieter canal, in the hush of the residential district, the presence of other vessels makes itself known, the creak of wood, and the soft thump of canoes bumping at the water stairs reaching you from around corners, from beyond the screening walls. The man has completed his business, whatever it was, and his canoe now carries the evidence of his day's purchases, the hull sitting lower in the water, the balance shifted by the weight of his acquisitions. You return with him toward the wider channels, the path of his morning journey now reversed, the light falling from a different angle, the shadows lying in different places. The evening approaches, and the quality of illumination changes, the harshness of midday giving way to a softer, more golden presence. The water glows in the low sun, and you see how the surface of the canal has become a mirror for the declining light, each ripple catching and holding a fragment of the color, the whole channel seeming to flow with liquid amber. The main waterway receives you again, the traffic now thinning as the day ends, the vessels returning to their home landings, the water entrances closing against the coming night. The bridges stand empty of their sections, the removable wooden parts now replaced, the spans complete for the hours when no tall cargo will need to pass. The man paddles with a tired rhythm, the strokes longer, the pauses between them more extended, his body acknowledging the labor of the day while his mind, perhaps, already occupies the house toward which he moves. You pass the place where tribute was recorded, now empty of officials, the Amatl papers stored. The count completed for this day. The palace and temple complexes receive their last deliveries, the canoes that serve them tying up at their appointed places, their crews climbing to the stone landings with the final loads. The golden light deepens toward amber, toward the first suggestions of rose and violet that precede true dusk. The man approaches his own water entrance, the canoe gliding the last distance with a momentum that carries it to the stone step where a child waits to receive the painter's rope. The evening sound of frogs beginning in the reeds beyond the city's edge reaches you now, a chorus that will swell through the hours of darkness, that marks the boundary between the water streets of Tenochtitlan and the wilder marsh from which the city was drawn. The creak of wood and the soft thump of hull against stone yield now to this older rhythm, this more ancient music of water and vegetation and the creatures that live between them. The man secures his canoe, his purchases lifted to the waiting arms of his family, the water entrance closing against the night. You remain for a moment at the edge of the canal, watching the last vessels find their landings, the last poles and paddles lifted from the water, the last sounds of hull against stone marking the end of the day's movement. The grid of canals serving as streets grows still, the water settling into a surface that reflects the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, the city of Tenochtitlan preparing for the night, its water streets waiting for the morning and the return of the canoes that serve as its lifeblood, the vessels resting now, patient in the darkness, the aqueduct from Chapultepec still bringing its fresh water, the work of Moctezuma I and of Nezahualcoyotl of Texcoco still sustaining the life that will resume with the dawn, the cycle continuing, the count moving toward the next gathering, the next dispersal, the next opportunity for the man to push off from his house's water entrance, his canoe gliding into the morning traffic, the golden light spreading once more across the surface of Lake Texcoco in thin sheets of pale gold. The Templo mare rises against the last of the night, its bulk darker than the sky around it. You are standing at the base of the Great Pyramid, your hand resting upon the roughened slope of the serpent balustrade. The stone is cold, still holding the chill of the hours before dawn, and your breath comes in faint clouds that dissolve into the darkness above. Around you, the sacred precinct of Tenochtitlan lies in shadow, the smaller temples scattered like sleeping beasts across the paved ground. The Huey Teocalli, the great temple, dominates everything, its twin summits lost in the low clouds that drift across the lake basin. A single torch moves high upon the stairway, ascending in jagged intervals as the bearer climbs. You watch the flame grow smaller, then larger, then smaller again as the priest pauses to breathe. The stairs of the Templo mare are steep and uneven, each riser carved to a height that strains the leg, each tread worn concave by generations of feet. The seventh and final version of this pyramid, inaugurated in the year 1487, rises approximately 60 meters above the plaza where you stand. 7 times the temple has been rebuilt and expanded, each new shell enclosing the old, each dedication marking the accumulation of sacred power. The torch has reached the summit now. You can see it moving between the twin shrines, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the other to Tlatelolco. The priest is tending the sacred fire that burns in the brazier before the shrine of the sun god, the patron deity of the Mexica, the god of war and of the sun's fierce journey. These fires are never permitted to extinguish, maintained through the longest nights by priests who surrender sleep as their offering. The flame you observe has burned through storms and stillness alike, fed with coals, carried up the steep stairs in clay vessels that retain their heat against the wind. The sky above the eastern shrine is lightening to a color between gray and rose. You begin your own ascent, your sandals finding the worn centers of each step, your fingers trailing along the balustrade where the scales of stone serpents have been carved in low relief. The cold of the stone underfoot seeps upward through the leather of your soles. With each tier you climb, the wind grows stronger, the air thinner, the sounds of the city below more distant and more diffuse. The Templo was the most important and largest temple in Tenochtitlan, and its summit commands the full circumference of the island city, the lake visible at every horizon once the light has grown sufficient. At the fourth terrace, you pause. The plaza spreads below you like a dark cloth, the smaller temples of the sacred precinct arranged in their established order. The sacred ball court lies to your left, its walls catching the first suggestion of dawn. Beyond it, the Tzompanli rises, the skull rack where the heads of sacrificial victims were displayed in rows that testify to the power of the Mexica and the hunger of their gods. The Templo was the site of major religious ceremonies and sacrifices, and the morning will bring new offerings, new petitions, new blood to sustain the sun in his path across the sky. The priest above you has added new coals to the sacred fire. You smell the sharp resin of copal smoke before you see it, the sweet and penetrating fragrance rising in thin columns that the wind tears and disperses. The priests below are grinding fresh resin for the morning's incense, their stone tools scraping against the wooden bowls in rhythms that have not changed in generations. The Telpochcalli demands constant preparation, constant attention, the cycle of observance turning like the calendar itself. You reach the summit as the grey light strengthens to silver. The twin shrines stand before you, their doorways facing west and south, their roofs thatched with fresh palm that rustles in the wind. The shrine of Huitzilopochtli occupies the southern summit, painted in stripes of blue and white, hummingbird feathers hanging in the doorway as the god's sacred ornament. The shrine of Tlatelolco, god of rain and agriculture and fertility, crowns the northern peak, its walls painted in the green and black of the storm, its altar dressed with vessels that will receive the offerings of maize and amaranth. The temple's orientation aligned with astronomical events, and on certain days, the sun would enter the doorway of the war god's shrine at precisely calculated angles, the light falling upon the hidden image within. The priest who climbed before you is old, his cheeks hollow, his eyes reddened from smoke and vigil. He accepts your presence without speech, returning his attention to the fire. The coals glow deep orange, pulsing with each breath of wind, and the new fuel has begun to catch, sending up fresh plumes of copal smoke that drift across the summit platform. You move to the eastern edge, where the balustrade has been worn smooth by the hands of countless observers. The city unfolds below in the gathering light. Tenochtitlan emerges from shadow, its causeways becoming visible as pale lines across the water, its Chinampas resolving into patterns of green and brown. The lake stretches to every horizon, its surface barely moving in the morning stillness, the distant shore a faint darkness against the brightening sky. The Templo stood at the center of this world, the axis around which the Mexica universe turned, the point where the vertical and horizontal planes intersected, where the 13 heavens above and the 9 levels below found their meeting place in the stone and blood of the summit. Other priests are arriving now, their torches visible on the stairways that ascend from all 4 directions. They carry bundles of reeds and feathers, vessels of pulque and baskets of tamales, the offerings that will accompany the greater sacrifice to come. The grinding of copal continues somewhere below, the sound rising and falling with the wind. You smell the resin everywhere now, the sweet sharpness of it mixing with the cold mineral scent of the lake, the faint organic suggestion of the thatched roofs below, the smoke of cooking fires beginning to rise from the houses of the nobles in the surrounding precincts. The priest beside you adds more coals to the sacred fire. The flames leap and settle, casting irregular shadows across the painted walls of Huitzilopochtli's shrine. The wind at this height is constant, stronger than in the streets below, carrying the cold from the open water and the distant snows of the volcanic peaks. Your mantle flaps against your shoulders, and you gather it more closely, though the priests around you seem unaffected by the chill, their bare chests marked with the scars of their own blood offerings, their ears torn where the obsidian blades have drawn their tribute. The sky in the east has become a pale, luminous gold, the color spreading upward from the horizon in layers that shift and dissolve. The first edge of the sun appears, and immediately the priests begin to move with greater purpose, arranging themselves before the southern shrine, checking the alignment of their mirrors and their instruments. The Templo was dedicated to two principal deities, and the morning rite belongs to Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird on the left, the warrior who led the Mexica from Aztlan to this island in the lake, who guided them through the centuries of wandering to the place where they would build their power. The sun's first rays strike the shrine of Huitzilopochtli. The painted stripes of blue and white seem to ignite, the colors becoming more vivid, more present, as the light finds them. The prayers begin, the old priest's voice rising in the established cadences, calling the sun by his names, reciting his journeys, reminding him of the nourishment that waits in the temple below. The other priests join at the appointed moments, their voices overlapping and separating, the Nahuatl syllables precise and ancient, unchanged since the first dedication of the first temple upon this site. You stand at the rear of the group, your shadow stretching long across the summit platform toward the shrine of Tlatelolco. The northern shrine remains in shadow, the storm god's domain still belonging to the night, and you can see the vessels of water and maize that have been left there in preparation for the afternoon rites, when the sun will have passed to the west, and Tlatelolco's priests will take their turn at the sacred fire. The temple had twin shrines at its summit, one for each deity, and the balance between them measured the balance of the Mexica world. Sun and rain, war and agriculture, the eagle and the water, the dry season and the wet. The copal smoke thickens as fresh incense is brought up the stairs. The sharp smell fills your lungs, resinous and penetrating, the scent of temples and of offerings, of the presence of the gods made palpable in the air. The priests move through the smoke as through water, their gestures slow and deliberate, the instruments in their hands catching the light. Below, the city has fully woken, the sound of it rising in fragments that reach you attenuated by the height and the wind. The cry of a vendor, the splash of a canoe paddle, the distant rhythmic sound of construction, the work of Tenochtitlan continuing its perpetual expansion. The sun clears the horizon, and the full light strikes the Templo. The pyramid's color changes from gray to ochre to a warm rose that will intensify as the day advances. The stone underfoot begins to lose its cold, absorbing the first warmth, and you shift your weight, feeling the texture of the worn summit platform through your sandals. The Huitzilopochtli, the great temple, stands revealed in the morning, its scale apparent now against the city and the lake, its height commanding the view in every direction, its significance manifest in the gathering of priests and the smoke of the sacred fire. The old priest has fallen silent, the first sequence of prayers complete. He moves to the edge of the platform, looking down upon the sacred precinct, the smaller temples that surround the great pyramid, like attendants around a king. The sacred precinct surrounded the Templo, containing many smaller temples dedicated to the countless aspects of the divine, to the calendar gods and the local gods, to the forces that shaped the agricultural year and the fortunes of war. Each had its priests, its fires, its cycle of observance, but all turned upon this center, this axis, this point where the twin shrines mark the dual nature of power. You move to the northern edge, where the wind comes more directly from the lake. The water is visible in all directions now, the causeways drawing their straight lines across it, the canoes beginning to move in the channels between the Chinampas, The city appears to float, as it did for the first Spaniards who saw it from the pass, as it must have appeared to the first Mexica who followed their gods' command to seek the place where the eagle perched upon the cactus with the serpent in its beak. The Templo Mare was the center of this floating world, the stone anchor that held the island against the water, the point where the vertical shaft of the cosmos descended to meet the horizontal plane of the human. The priests are preparing the morning's offerings, laying out the feathers and the jade, the quills of gold dust, and the small figurines of the gods in their aspects. The grinding of copal has ceased, the fresh incense ready in its bowls, waiting for the moment of application. The sharp smell of the resin mingles with the smoke of the sacred fire, creating a compound fragrance that seems to belong to no single element, the olfactory signature of the temple itself. You breathe it deeply, the cold air moving across your face, the wind pressing your mantle against your back. The sun climbs higher, and the shadow of the Templo Mare shortens across the sacred precinct. The Tzompantli becomes fully visible, the rows of skulls whitening in the light, the record of past ceremonies written in bone. The sacred ball court waits empty, its game belonging to other days, other calculations of the calendar. The smaller temples begin to receive their own worshippers, the morning's devotion spreading outward from this center, the prayers of the city ascending like the smoke that rises from 100 fires. A young priest approaches the sacred fire, carrying a vessel of coals wrapped in fiber to retain their heat. He adds them carefully, building the fire against the wind that would diminish it, and the flames respond, leaping higher, sending fresh smoke toward the shrine of Huitzilopochtli. The priests maintained sacred fires that were never allowed to extinguish, and the continuity of this flame measured the continuity of Mexica power, the unbroken succession of days and nights that the temple had witnessed since its last dedication in 1487. 7 years before this morning, 7 years in which the empire had continued its expansion, its accumulation of tribute and territory. You descend a single tier, finding a place where the wind is less insistent, where you can observe without participating. The steep stairs fall away below you, each step a stretch of the leg, each riser worn by the passage of feet that have climbed in hope and in fear, in triumph and in exhaustion. The stone is warmer now where the sun has reached it, the cold of the night retreating to the shadowed places, the northern face of the pyramid, the interior of the shrines. The Templo Mare was rebuilt and expanded multiple times, and each reconstruction had added to this accumulation of human effort, this concentration of sacred labor that the morning light now reveals in its full extent. The prayers resume, a new sequence beginning as the sun reaches the measured height. The priests' voices carry across the summit, falling into the patterns that the trained ear recognizes, the invocations and responses that constitute the proper address to the divine. You do not join, but you listen, the Nahuatl syllables entering your awareness without the mediation of full comprehension, the sound itself sufficient, the rhythm of worship that has continued upon this site through the generations of construction and dedication. The distant sound of the city waking has become the sound of the city awake. The full daytime activity rising from far below, the commerce and the labor, the political negotiations and the domestic preparations, the life of Tenochtitlan proceeding in its established courses. The Templo Mare presides over all of this, visible from every quarter, the twin shrines marking the summit, the serpent balustrades defining the edges of the stairways, the platform at each tier offering its view of the city and the lake. The seventh and final version of the pyramid, inaugurated in 1487, would stand for only a few years more, though none who worship upon it this morning could know this, could imagine the silence that would eventually fall upon the summit, the extinguishing of the sacred fire, the collapse of the twin shrines into the rubble that would wait beneath the colonial city. But that future is not present in the morning light, in the smoke of copal, in the voices of the priests. You stand upon the pyramid as it exists in the fullness of its power at the center of the Mexica world, and the sun continues its ascent, and the prayers continue their cycle, and the wind carries the smoke across the lake that stretches to every horizon. The Tepochcalli, the great temple, endures in this moment, its stone warm now underfoot, its fires burning, its gods receiving their due. The complex balance of sun and rain, war and agriculture, maintained through the precise observance of the priests who move upon the summit in their ancient patterns. The morning advances. The offerings are presented, the blood drawn, the prayers concluded in their proper sequence. The sacred fire burns steadily now, well established against the wind, and the old priest who climbed in darkness settles into a posture of vigil, his work for this hour complete, his attention turning to the maintenance of the flame against the hours, until the sun begins its descent, and Tlatelolco's priests assume their precedence. You begin your descent, finding the worn centers of the steps with your feet, the balustrade guiding your hand. The steep stairs of the pyramid demand attention, each step a stretch of the leg, each tier a negotiation with gravity and balance. The air thickens as you descend, the wind diminishing, the sounds of the city growing more distinct, more immediate. The sharp smell of copal smoke lingers in your clothing, in your hair, the sweet resinous signature of the morning's presence upon the summit. At the base of the pyramid, the sacred precinct spreads around you, the smaller temples busy with their own observances, their own fires, their own particular devotions. The Templo rises behind you, its bulk still commanding the view, its shadow falling across the paved ground where you stand. The Tepochcalli, the great temple, the center of the world, the axis of the Mexica cosmos, continues its existence above you, the twin shrines visible against the sky, the smoke of the sacred fire still rising in the wind that blows stronger at that height than in the streets below. You move through the precinct, past the ball court where the game will be played when the calendar demands, past the Telpochcalli where the skulls record the nourishment offered to the gods. The remains of the Templo were rediscovered in 1978 by electrical workers, but that discovery belongs to another age, another understanding of what this place meant and means. This morning belongs to the temple as it was, to the priests who climb the steep stairs in darkness, to the fires that must never extinguish, to the prayers that rise with the sun to the shrine of Huitzilopochtli, the patron god of the Mexica, the god of war, and of the sun's fierce journey across the sky. The city surrounds you, the lake visible at the turning of each street, the canals carrying their traffic of canoes and goods. Tenochtitlan moves through its day, the cycle continuing, the count moving toward the next gathering, the next dispersal, the next opportunity for the man to push off from his house's water entrance, his canoe gliding into the morning traffic, the golden light spreading once more across the surface of Lake Texcoco in thin sheets of pale gold that deepen and warm as the sun climbs toward the zenith and the Templo stands at the center, receiving, presiding, enduring in the smoke and the stone, and the voices that rise from its summit to the sky above. You are standing in the courtyard of a merchant's house in the hour before dawn, when the sky above Tenochtitlan holds the color of wet clay, and the city has not yet begun to stir. Around you, the walls of the compound rise in pale plaster, and the air carries the mineral scent of stored water in stone basins. A man moves through the half-light, his mantle draped against the morning coolness, his feet making no sound upon the swept earth. This is a house of the Pochteca, the long-distance merchants who walk between cities, who carry the luxury goods that bind the empire together in threads of jade and quetzal feather, and the dark, precious beans of cacao. The Pochteca held a special status in Aztec society, distinct from commoners and nobles alike, and this status shows in the quiet confidence of his movements, in the space that surrounds him, in the respect given even now by the porters who gather at the courtyard's edge with their wooden frames and their leather straps. The rustle of folded cotton cloth fills a corner of the courtyard where the merchant's wife works by lamplight, her fingers testing the weave of a quatchly that will serve as currency on the road ahead. The cloth makes a soft whisper as she unfolds it, then folds it again, her hands knowing the weight and texture that traders will accept in the markets of distant cities. The smell of stored feathers drifts from a sealed room nearby, faintly oily and exotic, the preserved plumage of birds from tropical forests far to the east, gathered now in bundles that will travel onward to noble houses or remain here as collateral against the journey's cost. She does not speak as she works, and the silence of the merchant's house when preparations are underway has its own quality, its own weight of anticipation and customary separation. The Pochteca formed a hereditary social group with internal hierarchy, and the wife's examination of the cloth demonstrates a knowledge passed through generations, the understanding of which goods hold value, which weaves will be accepted, which standards must be maintained for trade to proceed with honor. You move closer to the center of the courtyard, and the merchant looks up from his counting, his face marked with the tattoos of his guild affiliation, his eyes carrying the particular focus of a man about to depart for months. He counts his porters again, 12 men for this journey, each one selected for endurance and discretion, each one bound by custom and debt to carry the wooden frames that will hold their loads across hundreds of kilometers. The creak of leather straps being tested comes from the far side of the courtyard, where an assistant works through the harnesses by touch, finding weak points, replacing worn sections with new cuts of hide. The Aztecs had no knowledge of the wheel, so all transport was by human porters, and the efficiency of this system depended upon the strength of these men, the organization of their loads, the careful distribution of weight that would allow them to walk 20, 30, 40 kilometers in a day across roads maintained by imperial decree. The merchant's count moves through the porters, through the bundles of trade goods, through the dried provisions that will sustain them when they pass beyond the regions where hospitality can be expected. The sky above the courtyard begins to lighten, the clay color giving way to bands of pale rose, and then to the clear blue that will define the day. The merchant finishes his preparations and stands for a moment at the courtyard's gate, looking back toward the inner rooms where his wife has already returned to her loom, where the women will continue their weaving in quiet through the months of his absence. The silence of the merchant's house, when he is gone, has been described by those who have studied these lives, the particular quality of a space, organized around departure and return, around the long cycles of the trading calendar. The Pochteca journeys on foot could last several months, and the household adjusted itself to these rhythms, the women maintaining the economic base through textile production, the children learning the guild's secrets through observation and gradual participation, the stored wealth measured not only in goods, but in the relationships maintained across vast distances through repeated contact and reliable dealing. You follow the merchant as he departs at dawn with his train, walking the causeway toward the eastern shore of the lake, his porters falling into the steady pace that will carry them through the first day and into the weeks beyond. The causeway stretches before you, a raised road of stone and earth that crosses the water with the confidence of imperial engineering, its surface worn smooth by generations of feet and the occasional passage of nobles in litters. Around you, the city awakens in its layers, the earliest workers already moving toward the Chinampas, the first canoes cutting lines across the still water, the smoke of cooking fires rising in thin columns from the rooftops. The cold air moves across your face, carrying the moisture of the lake, the faint salt of its waters, the promise of heat to come as the sun climbs above the eastern mountains. The merchant does not look back at the city as he walks. his attention fixed upon the road, upon the pacing of his men, upon the calculations of distance and time that will govern every decision until his return. The taste of dried food, eaten cold, on the road comes to you weeks later, far from the city's comforts, as the merchant's train has passed beyond the familiar territories of the valley and into the tributary cities that mark the stages of their journey. You are sitting now at the edge of a market square in a city whose name matters less than its position on the route, its function as a node in the network of exchange that the Pochteca maintained across the empire. The merchant trades quietly here, observing all he sees, his transactions conducted with the discretion that guild practice demanded, his eyes noting the political mood, the military preparations, the shifts in alliance and tension that would form part of his eventual report. The Pochteca were often used as spies and messengers by Aztec rulers, and this double function was understood by all parties. The merchant's presence in foreign cities, accepted because his goods were desired, his information valuable to those who could extract it, his role as communication link between different rulers, a stabilizing force in a political system that depended upon timely knowledge. The clink of cacao beans in wooden containers accompanies a transaction nearby, the sound sharp and particular in the morning air of the market, and you watch as the merchant examines a bundle of cotton cloth offered by a local trader, his fingers testing the weave with the same expertise his wife displayed in the courtyard weeks before. There were 12 Pochteca guilds across the major cities of the empire, and the standards they maintained allowed this cloth to move between hands with confidence, its value understood without negotiation, its quality guaranteed by the reputation of its source. Guild cities included Tenochtitlan, Tlatelolco, Texcoco, and Xochimilco, and the merchant's affiliation with one of these centers marked him as part of a system larger than any individual journey, a network of trust and obligation that extended across the full reach of Aztec influence. The pre-Columbian long-distance trade system was mainly based on barter, though standardized luxury goods like cacao beans and cotton cloth served as money substitutes, facilitating exchanges where direct trade of disparate commodities would have been impractical. The creak of leather straps and the soft padding of porters' feet on dust returns to your awareness as the merchant's train moves onward, leaving the market city behind, entering now the longer stretches between settlements where the road becomes a thread through forest and upland, through the varying ecologies that define the empire's geographical reach. Distances between production areas and markets ranged from 200 to 800 kilometers, and the merchant's route has been planned to connect these nodes with maximum efficiency, each stop calculated for its trading opportunities, its political intelligence, its provisions for the porters who must be fed and rested if they are to maintain their loads. You walk now at the rear of the train, feeling in your own body the accumulated fatigue of weeks on the road, the way the dust finds its way through clothing, into skin, into the persistent awareness of distance from the courtyard, where the merchant's wife continues her weaving in the silence of his absence. The smell of stored feathers, faintly oily and exotic, reaches you in a trading house where the merchant has paused to negotiate for a large bundle of Quetzal plumage, the iridescent green feathers that will command the highest prices in the capital, that will adorn the headdresses of priests and nobles, that will demonstrate the reach of the empire into tropical zones beyond the control of any military force. The merchant examines the bundle with practiced care, his fingers separating the feathers, testing their attachment to the skin, assessing the preservation methods that have kept them from decay through the journey from their origin. He trades quietly here, his voice low, his offers measured against the knowledge of prices in other markets, the cost of transport, the risk of loss to weather or theft, or the arbitrary demands of local officials. The Pochteca served as communication links between different rulers, and his presence in this house carries that function as well. The news he brings from the capital, the questions he asks in return, the careful cultivation of relationships that would serve the empire's interests even as they advanced his own. You move through the weeks of the journey as through a landscape of varying textures, the dust of the road giving way to mud in the rainy passages, to the packed earth of maintained highways, to the stone-paved approaches of major cities where the imperial presence was most directly felt. The merchant accepts this austerity as part of his vocation, his body adapted through repetition to the demands of the trail, his mind occupied with the constant calculations of trade, the assessment of goods, the maintenance of his porter's health and morale, the gathering of information that will form his eventual report to palace officials. The rustle of folded cotton cloth returns in a highland market where the merchant exchanges a portion of his quatchly for raw jade, the stone emerging from wrappings of protective fiber, its green depths catching the afternoon light that filters through the roof of the trading house. You stand beside him as he examines each piece, his touch knowing the quality that years of handling have taught him to recognize, the color, the translucency, the absence of flaws that would reduce value in the capital's workshops. The Pochteca traded luxury goods, cacao, cotton cloth, quetzal feathers, jade, turquoise and furs, and each of these commodities moved through the empire in patterns established over generations, the sources of supply and the centers of demand connected by the walking routes of these merchants, the human porters carrying between their shoulders the material basis of elite display and religious observance. The merchant's examination of the jade continues, his negotiations proceeding through the indirect forms that polite trade required, the offers and counteroffers made in calculated ambiguity, the final agreement marked by a particular quality of silence, the mutual recognition that both parties have reached the limit of their advantage. The creak of leather straps resumes as the train reassembles, the jade secured in the frames, the porters adjusting to the altered weight, the merchant counting again, always counting, the inventory of goods and men that defines his responsibility. You walk now through a landscape of pine and oak, the air cooler than in the tropical zones where the feathers were gathered, the road climbing toward the passes that will lead back toward the valley, toward the lake, toward the city that has continued its life in his absence. The Pochteca had their own religious rituals and patron deities, and the merchant observes his private devotions at dawn and dusk, the brief prayers and offerings that protect the journey, that maintain the favor of the powers who govern trade and travel, who watch over the dangerous passages between cities where human presence is thin, and the older forces of the landscape assert their continued dominion. These rituals are not performed for you to observe, but you sense their occurrence in the merchant's pauses, in the particular quality of his attention at certain moments, in the small objects that appear and disappear within his traveling pouch. The soft padding of porters' feet on dust continues through the days of return, the rhythm established early in the journey now automatic, the men's bodies moving in the collective trance of long-distance walking, their minds elsewhere, their muscles performing the work that has become habitual through repetition. You feel in your own breathing the adjustment to altitude as the train descends toward the valley, the air thickening, the temperatures rising, the familiar vegetation of the lake region gradually replacing the mountain species. The merchant's pace does not vary, his endurance a matter of professional necessity, his body as adapted to this work as his mind is to the calculations of trade. He has been walking for months now, and the journey has marked him in ways visible to those who know how to read them. The slight leanness of prolonged exertion, the weathering of skin, the particular alertness that comes from constant attention to the road, to his men, to the opportunities and dangers of passage through territories not his own. You imagine the courtyard as it was when you stood there before dawn, the pale plaster walls, the mineral scent of stored water, the merchant's wife examining the Quatchly by lamplight. The merchant's return will alter this silence, will bring the noise of unpacking, the assessment of the journey's success, the reintegration of his presence into domestic rhythms that have adjusted to his absence. The cold air moves across your face again as the train crosses the final causeway, the lake spreading on either side, the city rising before you in its familiar configuration of temples and palaces, and the dense fabric of commoner housing. The merchant's pace quickens almost imperceptibly, the proximity of home releasing some tension held through the months of travel, the completion of the journey now visible, now achievable. The Templo stands at the center of the city, its summit catching the afternoon light, and you feel in the merchant's attention the same orientation that governed the departure, the city's sacred geography providing the reference point for all movement, all calculation, all meaning. He returns with tropical feathers and jade, his reports delivered to palace officials, and the double function of his journey reaches its conclusion in these final stages, the goods to be distributed through the appropriate channels, the information to be extracted and recorded in the systems of imperial knowledge. The clink of cacao beans in wooden containers marks the inventory as the merchant's goods are received at a guild house in Tlatelolco, the major market center where the long-distance trade found its official accounting. You stand in the courtyard of this receiving station, larger than the merchant's domestic space, organized for the processing of bulk goods, the assessment of quality, the recording of transactions that would affect taxation and obligation. The merchant's count moves through his porters, now released to their rest, through the bundles of feathers and jade, and the remaining Quatchly, through the detailed narrative of his journey that he will deliver in stages to those authorized to receive it. The smell of stored feathers, faintly oily and exotic, fills the receiving house as the Quetzal plumage is unpacked, the iridescence that seemed muted in the tropical trading house now brilliant in the highland light, the quality of preservation confirmed, the value established through comparison with existing stocks. The merchant watches this process with the particular attention of a man whose reputation depends upon the accuracy of his assessments, whose future journeys will be financed partly upon the profit of this one, whose standing in the guild hierarchy will be affected by the success of these transactions. Much of what is known about the Pochteca comes from Bernardino de Sahagún's Codex Florentinus, and the systematic quality of this receiving process, the careful documentation, the standardized evaluation, reflects the bureaucratic sophistication that Sahagún recorded in his monumental ethnographic project, the detailed observation of a culture that would survive only in such texts, in such fragments of practice and belief. The rustle of folded cotton cloth returns as the merchant's remaining Quatchly is counted and tested, the weave examined by guild officials, the quality confirmed against the standards maintained in the capital. You stand at the edge of this activity, your role as observer now nearing its end, the journey's completion marking also the completion of your placement within this scene. The merchant's wife will be notified of his return, the household silence will be broken, the cycles of departure and return will begin their slow turn toward the next journey, the next opportunity for the man to push off from his house's water entrance, his canoe gliding into the morning traffic. The golden light spreads across the surface of Lake Texcoco in thin sheets of pale gold that deepen and warm as the sun climbs toward the zenith, and the Templo stands at the center, receiving, presiding, enduring in the smoke and the stone and the voices that rise from its summit to the sky above. The woven reed curtain falls across the doorway as the woman draws it closed with both hands, and the last grey light of the fading afternoon withdraws from the single-story house of adobe bricks. You are standing in the central courtyard of this merchant's dwelling in the district of Tlatelolco, and the cool of evening after the heat of day moves across your face like a slow breath drawn from the surface of Lake Texcoco. The stone foundations beneath your feet hold the warmth of hours past, though the air above them has begun to soften and settle into the rhythms of dusk. Around you, the courtyard walls rise in wattle and daub construction, their surfaces smoothed by many seasons of rain and repair, and the thatch overhead, made from grass and palm leaves, rustles faintly as a breeze passes from the water toward the interior of the island city. The woman who closed the curtain is the wife of a Pochteca merchant, one of those silent traders who journey to distant lands and return with cacao and quetzal feathers and the rough green stones of the far south. She has returned from the market at Tlatelolco, where the stalls closed at dusk and the canoe traffic diminished after dark, and her feet are still dusty from the causeway paths. Now she moves toward the main room of the house, that space which serves for sleeping and eating and receiving guests, and the smell of burning charcoal and masa on the comal griddle reaches you before you see the source. The maize dough was prepared earlier in the day, ground fine on the metate by her own hands or perhaps by the hands of her daughters, and now it waits in a ceramic bowl near the fire that her youngest son tends with patient attention. The boy is perhaps 7 years old enough to hold responsibility in a household where cleanliness is practiced with strict regularity, and every member contributes to the order of the day. He kneels near the hearth, feeding small sticks of pine into the flames, and the soft light of flames through the thatch casts moving shadows across the courtyard stones. You watch as the fire catches and steadies, and the grandmother emerges from the sleeping chamber where she has rested through the heat of the afternoon. She is old enough to remember the great temple before its last enlargement, old enough to have seen 2 generations of merchants depart and return from the distant markets of Zicalango and the cacao groves, and now she settles onto a woven mat near the fire with the weight of woven blankets gathered around her shoulders. The daughters of the house sit near the doorway, where the last light from the west still offers enough clarity for their work. They weave on backstrap looms, the wooden frames held against their bodies by straps that loop around their lower backs, and the clack of the loom is steady as the rhythm of breathing. The elder daughter is perhaps 14, her fingers moving with the certainty of long practice, and the younger, perhaps 11, still pauses now and then to correct a tension in her warp threads. You are standing near enough to see the patterns emerging, the geometric designs in red and brown, and the undyed cream of the cotton itself, and the clack of the loom continues as the light fades, and the fire becomes the primary source of illumination in the single-story house of adobe bricks. The grandmother speaks, and her voice carries the quality of all old voices in the evening, a low murmur that seems to rise from the same source as the flames. She tells of the city's founding, of the sign that the priests awaited, the eagle upon the cactus with the serpent in its beak, and her words fall into the space between the fire and the weaving, between the smell of burning charcoal and masa on the comal griddle, and the distant, rhythmic sound of temple drums carrying across the water. The youngest son listens with his chin upon his knees, and the daughter's hands continue their work even as their attention turns toward the old woman's voice. You are sitting now upon a low bench against the courtyard wall, and the cool of evening after the heat of day moves through the open spaces of the house, carrying with it the faint moisture of the lake and the distant suggestion of gardens beyond the district's edge. The woman, the merchant's wife, has begun to press the maize dough into thin circles, and the comal griddle over the fire receives each tortilla with a soft hiss that joins the other sounds of the household. The evening meal is typically the main family gathering in a house such as this, and the preparation holds the weight of daily ritual, the repetition that marks the passage of time in the 260-day ritual calendar and the 365-day solar calendar that governs religious life. The daughters will set aside their weaving when the food is ready, and the backstrap looms will rest against the wall until the morning light returns. The grandmother's story continues, threading through the generations from the founding to the present, from the first stones of the Templo to the temple fires visible in the darkness beyond the courtyard. The tortillas rise upon the comal, turning from pale to spotted brown, and the woman sets them aside in a woven basket lined with cloth to preserve their heat. She has prepared also a sauce of tomatoes and chilies ground together, and there is atol, that warm drink of maize dissolved in water, simmering in a pot at the edge of the fire. The tamales, wrapped in corn husks and steamed earlier in the day, are brought from a ceramic vessel and arranged upon a plate. You are watching this preparation from your place against the wall, and the soft light of flames through the thatch casts moving shadows that seem to animate the very air of the courtyard, making the space alive with the presence of those who have prepared meals here across the years of this house's existence. The daughters rise from their looms, and the clack of the loom falls silent as the family gathers in the main room for the evening meal. The youngest son has set out the woven mats upon the floor, and the grandmother moves with the weight of woven blankets still upon her shoulders to her accustomed place. The merchant's wife serves the food with her own hands, and the family eats in the relative quiet of a household where speech during meals is measured and deliberate. You are seated among them, though no eye turns to acknowledge your presence, and the taste of the atol reaches your own tongue, warm and slightly sweet, thickened by the maize that has been prepared as tortillas, tamales, and atol in this same manner across uncounted evenings. The night watchmen have begun their patrol through the neighborhoods, and their calls carry faintly from the streets beyond the courtyard walls, passing and fading as they move along their established routes. The city is largely quiet by late evening, with temple fires visible in the darkness from the summit of the Templo and from the lesser temples that mark the quarters of the island city. The canoe traffic has diminished after dark, and the water of Lake Texcoco lies in relative stillness beyond the causeways, reflecting the stars that emerge as the last clouds of the day dissolve into the upper air. You are standing now at the edge of the courtyard, looking upward through the opening in the thatch, and the cool of evening after the heat of day has deepened into the genuine chill of night, the air moving through the courtyard with a steadiness that seems to cleanse the space of all accumulation of warmth and odor. After the meal, the family makes small offerings of copal in the household shrine that occupies a niche in the wall of the main room. The resin burns upon a small brazier, and its pale smoke rises toward the thatch, carrying the prayers of the household to the attention of the gods. The evening prayers and offerings are made in household shrines such as this across the city, in the single-story houses of commoners and merchants, and in the greater compounds of the nobility, and the 260-day ritual calendar, and the 365-day solar calendar govern religious life with the same precision that governs the planting of maize and the timing of the market days. The merchant's wife leads the prayers, her voice low and formal, and the daughters and the youngest son repeat the responses they have learned from earliest childhood. The grandmother adds her own prayers, and in them you hear the names of the founding ancestors, the old gods of the earth and the rain, the deities of the merchant's path who protect those who travel to distant lands. The copal smoke spreads through the main room, and the smell of burning charcoal and masa on the comal griddle gradually yields to this sharper, more ethereal scent. You are kneeling near the shrine, and the soft light of flames through the thatch casts moving shadows across the faces of the family, each one intent upon their own devotion, their own particular address to the powers that govern existence in the island city of Tenochtitlan. The offerings completed, the family prepares for sleep. The daughters return to their weaving only to cover the looms with cloth against the night's moisture, and the youngest son banks the fire so that it will smolder until morning, when he will revive it with fresh fuel. The grandmother settles into her place in the sleeping chamber, and the weight of woven blankets settles over her with the familiarity of decades. The merchant's wife moves through the house with a final attention to order, securing the woven reed curtain against the doorway, adjusting the mats upon the floor, and the distant, rhythmic sound of temple drums carrying across the water has ceased, or perhaps has simply faded beyond the threshold of hearing as the city settles into the deeper phases of night. You are lying now upon a mat in the main room, and the familiar sounds of family breathing in the dark gradually surround you, each person finding their own rhythm of sleep. The merchant's wife breathes with the slight catch of one who has labored through the heat of the day, and the daughters, sharing a space near the wall, fall almost immediately into the soft cadence of the young. The youngest son murmurs something in his passage towards sleep, and the grandmother's breathing is so shallow as to seem almost continuous, a thread of sound that never fully pauses. The cool of evening after the heat of day has become the cool of night, and the air moving through the courtyard carries only the faintest suggestion of the lake's presence, the faintest memory of the day's warmth upon the stone foundations of the single-story house. The temple fires visible in the darkness continue their burning upon the heights of the Templo and in the lesser temples across the city, and the night watchmen continue their patrol through the neighborhoods with calls that pass and fade and pass again. The markets closed at dusk, and the canoe traffic diminished after dark, and now the island city holds its population in the stillness of the hours before dawn. You are sinking into the surface of your own sleep, and the smell of burning charcoal and masa on the comal griddle has faded into the deeper registers of memory, replaced by the present scent of thatch and adobe, and the faint residue of copal that lingers in the enclosed air. The 260-day ritual calendar and the 365-day solar calendar were central to religious life, with traditions suggesting their influence extended into all aspects of existence, including rest and sleep. The evening prayers and offerings were made in the household shrine, and now the gods hold their own council over the sleeping city, receiving the devotion of the day and preparing the requirements of the morning to come. The Pochteca merchant himself is absent, traveling perhaps upon the waters of the Gulf or along the mountain paths toward the markets of the south, and his wife sleeps with one portion of her attention always directed toward his return, toward the sound of a canoe at the water entrance, the voice of a man in the courtyard after many days of silence. The daughters dream perhaps of their weaving, of the patterns that their fingers know better than their waking minds, and the youngest son dreams of the fire he tends, of the responsibility that makes him, in his small way, a man within the household. The grandmother's dreams carry her backward through the decades to the city of her own childhood, to the houses of wattle and daub on stone foundations that have since been rebuilt, to the faces of the dead who speak to her now only in sleep. You are drifting with them, and the familiar sounds of family breathing in the dark become indistinguishable from your own breath, your own slow passage through the layers of consciousness toward the depths where time loses its ordinary measure. The soft light of flames through the thatch has diminished to embers, and the moving shadows have stilled into the fixed darkness of a house where all movement has ceased. The distant, rhythmic sound of temple drums carrying across the water does not resume, or if it does, it registers only upon the deepest levels of hearing, the levels that process sound without waking the mind to attention. The weight of woven blankets upon your own body holds you in place against the mat, against the stone foundations of the single-story house of adobe bricks, and the thatch overhead, made from grass and palm leaves, rustles once more as a final breeze passes from the water toward the interior of the island city. The night watchmen complete their rounds, and their calls give way to the silence that precedes the first light, the first stirring of the household toward the requirements of the new day. The Temazcal steam baths traditionally welcome visitors seeking purification and health through the ancient practice of sweating in enclosed heat, reflecting the long-standing importance of bathing in Mesoamerican cultures. The merchant's wife will rise before the others to rekindle the fire, to prepare the maize dough for the morning tortillas, and the daughters will resume their weaving by the light that enters through the doorway when the woven reed curtain is drawn aside. But now, in this hour, sleep holds the household in its common embrace, and the island city of Tenochtitlan lies upon its foundation of reeds and clay and stone, upon the waters of Lake Texcoco that surround it on all sides. The Templo stands at the center, receiving, presiding, enduring in the smoke and the stone and the silence that rises from its summit to the sky above. And the temple fires visible in the darkness burn with a steadiness that suggests the infinite patience of the gods. You are breathing with the family now, and the familiar sounds of family breathing in the dark have become your own sound, your own participation in the life of this house, this courtyard, this single-story dwelling organized around its central space. The copal smoke has entirely dispersed, and the household shrine waits in darkness for the morning's first attention. The evening meal was the main family gathering, and now the gathering has dispersed into the separate chambers of sleep, the separate journeys of the dreaming mind. The construction of adobe bricks or wattelan daub on stone foundations holds its integrity against the night, and the roofs of thatch, often made from grass or palm leaves, shelter those who lie beneath them from the dew and the occasional rain. The main room served for sleeping, eating, and receiving guests, and now it serves most fully for sleeping, for the profound stillness that renews the capacity for eating and receiving, for the commerce of the day. The youngest son turns upon his mat, and his hand brushes against the woven surface with a sound that is itself woven into the texture of the night. The grandmother's breathing catches, resumes its shallow thread, and the merchant's wife sighs once in her sleep, a sound that carries the weight of her day, her market, her preparation, her offering. You are descending now through the last layers of awareness, and the cool of evening after the heat of day has become merely the condition of the air, neither noticed nor named, simply present as the ground of all other presence. The stone foundations of the house hold their warmth against the cooling night, and the wattelan daub walls release the heat they absorbed through the hours of sun, maintaining a balance between interior and exterior, between the body and the world that surrounds it. The smell of burning charcoal and masa on the comal griddle will return with the morning, but now there is only the faintest residue, the memory of smell that informs the deepest levels of dream. You are no longer standing at the harbor at dawn, no longer watching the merchants unload their cargoes, no longer present in any scene that requires the attention of the waking mind. The weight of woven blankets has become the weight of sleep itself, the gentle pressure that holds the body in its place while the mind travels elsewhere. The familiar sounds of family breathing in the dark have slowed, deepened, entered the rhythms of genuine rest, and the island city breathes with them. The entire construction of reeds and clay and stone and water participating in the great cycle of activity and repose. The night watchmen have passed beyond the district of Tlatelolco, and their calls fade into the greater silence that receives all sound in the end. The 260-day ritual calendar and the 365-day solar calendar govern religious life, and they govern also this suspension of activity, this necessary pause in which the body and the spirit recover their capacity for devotion. The Pochteca merchant journeys still, upon water or upon land, and his wife sleeps with her face turned toward the wall where his weapons hang, his cloaks, the signs of his profession and his status. The soft light of flames through the thatch has reduced to the faintest glow of embers, and the moving shadows have become the fixed darkness of a house where even memory has ceased its movement. You are sleeping now, and the sleep is not yours alone, but shared with the family that surrounds you, with the grandmother and the daughters, and the youngest son and the merchant's wife, with all the inhabitants of the single-story houses of commoners and merchants that extend across the island and beyond, into the cities of the shore, the villages of the valley, the settlements that reach toward the distant mountains. The temple fires visible in the darkness continue their burning, and the Templo Mayor stands at the center, receiving, presiding, enduring in the smoke and the stone and the silence that rises from its summit to the sky above. The city is largely quiet by late evening, and now it is quieter still, held in the depths of the night from which morning will eventually emerge, but from which, for now, there is no emergence, only continuation, only the steady passage of hours marked by the breathing of sleepers, the faint rustle of thatch, the occasional call of a night bird passing over the water. The weight of woven blankets holds you, and the familiar sounds of family breathing in the dark carry you forward through the hours that remain before dawn, through the darkness that is itself a kind of water, a kind of lake upon which the sleeping city floats, upon which you float, carried toward the light that will come, that must come, in its own slow time.